Bigfoot saved me from a serial killer. It was a chilly autumn evening in the dense forests of Washington state. The air carried an eerie stillness, broken only by the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls. This is where Emily Carter found herself stranded after her car skidded off the narrow mountain road during a sudden downpour. Her heart pounded as she realized how far she was from civilization. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Emily had always been adventurous, but this trip to the Pacific Northwest seemed different somehow. She had planned a solo camping adventure near Mount Rainier National Park, hoping to escape the chaos of city life. Little did she know that fate would lead her into something far more terrifying than she could ever imagine. As darkness fell over the forest, Emily decided to set up camp under the cover of ancient trees. The moonlight barely penetrated through the thick canopy above, casting long shadows across the forest floor. It was around 9:30 p.m. when she first heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind. Then came the sound of footsteps, deliberate, slow, methodical. The hairs on her neck stood up as she noticed strange markings carved into nearby tree trunks, symbols she couldn't recognize. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it some kind of ritualistic sign? Or perhaps just another camper's graffiti? But deep down, she felt uneasy. Something about these marks didn't feel right. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the woods as a branch snapped nearby. Emily froze. Her flashlight beam trembled as she scanned her surroundings. That's when she saw him, a figure standing at the edge of her light's reach, tall, thin, with glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. He wasn't moving, just watching, waiting. Her instincts told her to run. But before she could gather her courage, another presence emerged from deeper within the forest. This one was different, massive, towering, covered in dark fur. Its form moved silently despite its size. Emily's breath caught in her throat as both figures locked eyes. For what felt like eternity, they simply stared at each other. Then it happened. The thin man lunged toward her. In that split second, everything changed. The large creature reacted faster than she thought possible. With a single powerful motion, it intercepted the attacker. What followed was a chaotic struggle between the two beings. Growls, snarls, and the chilling sound of bones breaking. Emily watched in disbelief as the mysterious beast fought fiercely to protect her. Though terrified, she couldn't help but notice how intelligent its movements were. Not animalistic, almost human-like. After what seemed like hours, but was likely mere minutes, the fight ended abruptly. The attacker lay motionless on the ground while the protector stood guard over Emily. Gathering her wits, she slowly approached the creature. To her astonishment, it allowed her close proximity. Without speaking, there was an understanding between them. A silent agreement that she wouldn't harm him if he kept her safe. They spent the night together under the watchful eyes of countless stars. The atmosphere shifted from fear to cautious gratitude. As dawn broke, the forest transformed dramatically. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees, chasing away the previous night's horrors. Emily knew she needed to leave. But so did her savior. Before parting ways, they shared one final moment of connection, an unspoken promise never to forget this encounter. Back in Seattle, days later, Emily tried returning to normal life. Yet something gnawed at her thoughts constantly. Who or what exactly saved her life that fateful night? And why did those symbols appear specifically around her campsite? Determined to find answers, she began researching local legends. Stories of Bigfoot sightings became increasingly familiar. Could her protector truly be one of these elusive creatures? But there was more, much more. As she dug deeper, disturbing patterns emerged regarding missing persons cases throughout the region. Each victim disappeared near similar symbol-marked areas. Coincidence? or evidence of something darker lurking in the shadows. Haunted by questions without answers, Emily vowed to uncover the truth, even if doing so meant risking another encounter with either her savior or its deadly adversary. Because now she understood, some things aren't meant to remain hidden forever, and sometimes salvation comes from places we least expect. Bigfoot's footprints led to an unmarked grave. The dense forest of Oregon's Cascade Range was quiet that evening, the kind of silence that felt heavy and unnatural. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, leaving only a faint glow on the western edge of the sky. It was an ordinary night for most people in the small town of Timber Ridge, but not for John Carter, a local hiker who often ventured into the woods alone. He loved the solitude, the peace, and the chance to escape from the chaos of modern life. Little did he know that this particular journey would lead him down a path no one could have predicted. John set out at dusk, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as he followed a narrow trail that snaked its way through towering pines and ancient oaks. The air was cool, carrying with it the earthy scent of damp leaves and moss. His boots crunched softly against the ground, each step deliberate and measured. As he walked deeper into the forest, something unusual caught his eye: a series of large footprints pressed deeply into the soft soil. They were far too big to belong to any known animal or human. Unless, of course, they belonged to Bigfoot. He paused, his heart quickening slightly. This must be some prank, he muttered to himself, though deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that these tracks were real. The prints continued further along the trail, leading him farther away from the safety of the main path. Despite the growing unease in his chest, curiosity got the better of him. He decided to follow them, telling himself he'd turn back if anything seemed truly wrong. As John followed the mysterious footprints, the forest grew darker and more oppressive. The trees seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out what little moonlight there was. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a chill ran down his spine. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted eerily, its call echoing through the stillness. He stopped momentarily to check his compass, ensuring he hadn't wandered off course. Everything appeared normal except those enormous footprints ahead of him. After about 30 minutes of walking, the trail abruptly ended at the base of a massive redwood tree. There, surrounded by ferns and fallen logs, lay something that made John freeze, a makeshift cross carved into the bark of the tree. It looked old, weathered by time and exposure to the elements. Beneath it, written in faded letters, were the words, "Rest in peace." "What is this?" John whispered, his voice trembling slightly. A strange sensation crept over him, like being watched. He glanced around nervously, shining his flashlight into the shadows, but saw nothing. Still, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Something wasn't right here. Then he noticed another detail: the footprints didn't stop at the tree. Instead, they circled around it before disappearing entirely. Confused and increasingly uneasy, John crouched down to examine the area more closely. That's when he found I-10 unmarked grave hidden beneath layers of dirt and pine needles. His stomach churned as he realized the significance of what he'd stumbled upon. Why was there a grave so deep in the woods? And why had no one ever mentioned it? His mind raced with questions, but before he could dwell on them too long, a sound broke the silence: a low growl, distant yet unmistakable. John froze again, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, he turned his head toward the source of the noise. Through the gloom, he thought he saw movementa, dark shape moving between the trees. Panic surged within him, and without hesitation, he scrambled to his feet and began running back the way he came. The forest seemed alive now, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs magnified tenfold. John's flashlight beam darted wildly as he pushed himself faster, adrenaline fueling his escape. Behind him, the growling grew louder, closer. He dared not look back, fearing what he might see. All he could focus on was reaching the safety of the main trail. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he burst through the underbrush and onto the familiar path. Collapsing against a nearby boulder, he tried to catch his breath, his chest heaving. For several minutes, all he could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat. But then, just as he began to calm down, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching from behind. John bolted upright, fear gripping him anew. He sprinted down the trail, his legs burning with exertion. The footsteps followed relentlessly, closing the gap with alarming speed. Whatever it wasn't slowing down. Desperation clawed at him as he searched frantically for a place to hide. Up ahead, he spotted a hollow log partially buried in the ground. Without thinking twice, he dove inside, pulling dead branches and leaves over the entrance to conceal himself. For what felt like hours, he lay there, barely daring to breathe. The creature, whatever it was, passed close by, its presence almost palpable. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, and John swore he could feel its gaze lingering nearby. Finally, after an agonizing wait, the sounds faded into the distance, and he allowed himself to relax slightly. When dawn finally broke, painting the forest in hues of gold and orange, John emerged from his hiding spot, shaken but alive. He knew he needed to get out of the woods as quickly as possible. Along the way, he passed the same redwood tree where he'd discovered the grave. This time, however, the makeshift cross was gone, replaced by fresh scratches in the bark. Chills ran down his spine as he hurried past, never looking back. Back in Timber Ridge, John recounted his experience to anyone who would listen. Some dismissed it as mere imagination or a bad dream, while others listened intently, their expressions grim. One elderly man named Walter nodded knowingly when John described the location of the grave. "That place has been trouble for years," Walter said solemnly. "People disappear up there, and no one talks about it." John never returned to that part of the forest. In fact, he sold his house in Timber Ridge shortly afterward and moved across the country, unable to shake the memory of that night. To this day, he wonders if the footprints really belonged to Bigfooter, if there was something even darker lurking in those woods. Missing Camper's final video shows a Sasquatch. The forest of Blackwater National Park was eerily silent that night. The stars twinkled faintly above, casting an almost ghostly glow over the dense trees and underbrush. It was 10:45 p.m. when Emily Carter set up her final video recording in the remote area known as Whispering Pines campsite. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke into the camera. "This is my last attempt to capture anything unusual. I feel like I'm being watched." She paused, looking around nervously. The air felt heavy, oppressive even, with a chilling wind rustling through the branches. Emily had been camping alone for 3 days, determined to find evidence of the legendary Sasquatch that supposedly roamed these woods. Local folklore whispered tales of massive, hairy creatures watching from the shadows, but most dismissed them as mere legend. Yet something about this place unsettled her deeply. Every creak of a branch or distant howl made her heart race faster than before. At 11:17 p.m., her camera captured what would become the most debated piece of footage in modern history. As she panned the camera slowly across the clearing, the initial images showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual forest scenery bathed in moonlight. But then, at the edge of the frame near Old Willow Tree, a shadow moved unnaturally fast. Emily gasped audibly on the recording. What was that? She zoomed in quickly, revealing a figure standing approximately 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, reflecting the dim light of her flashlight. The creature stood perfectly still, observing her with an intensity that sent shivers down Emily's spine. For several long seconds, they locked gazes through the lens of her camera. Then, without warning, it vanished into the trees so swiftly it seemed almost supernatural. Emily stammered, I don't know what just happened. That thing. It wasn't human. Her hands shook visibly as she lowered the camera, fear evident in every word. Moments later, another sound echoed through the forest, low growls emanating from multiple directions. Emily packed her gear hurriedly, panic rising with each passing second. "I need to get out of here," she muttered, trying to keep her voice steady. As she turned off the camera for the final time that night, strange noises surrounded her. Snapping twigs, crunching leaves, and deep guttural sounds unlike anything she'd ever heard before. When search parties found Emily's abandoned campsite 2 days later, there was no sign of her anywhere. All they discovered was the damaged remains of her tent, scattered belongings, and the chilling video footage she'd recorded. Investigators noted peculiar tracks leading away from the site, much larger than any known animal species, but dismissed them officially as bear prints despite their unusual pattern. Back in town, locals exchanged uneasy glances upon hearing the news. Many remembered similar disappearances throughout the decades, always occurring during full moons near Whispering Pines. Some spoke of seeing towering figures moving silently between the trees late at night, while others claimed to have heard haunting screams coming from deep within the forest. These stories were often met with skepticism, yet now they carried new weight after Emily's disappearance. Months passed, and theories abounded regarding her fate. Cryptozoologists analyzed the video frame by frame, debating whether the creature caught on film could indeed be evidence of Sasquatch existence. Skeptics argued it was merely a well-placed costume or optical illusion caused by lighting conditions. However, none could explain the sheer terror etched onto Emily's face as she confronted whatever lurked in those woods. 1 year later, hikers stumbled upon something disturbing deep within Blackwater National Park. Remnants of clothing believed to belong to Emily, partially buried beneath fallen leaves and moss. Nearby, more mysterious footprints dotted the soft earth, some nearly twice the size of normal human steps. Authorities sealed off the area indefinitely, citing safety concerns for future visitors venturing too far off designated trails. Today, the story of Emily Carter serves as both cautionary tale and enduring mystery among outdoor enthusiasts nationwide. Those brave enough to visit Whispering Pines campsite report eerie sensations, feelings of being watched, unexplained noises, and sometimes glimpses of fleeting movement just beyond reach of sight. Rangers warn against overnight stays in the vicinity due to numerous reports of unsettling encounters since Emily's vanishing act. For many Americans, especially those living near wooded regions where such legends thrive, the possibility of Sasquatch remains tantalizingly real. Whether mythical beast or misunderstood creature, its presence continues to haunt our collective imagination. And perhaps somewhere deep within Blackwater National Park, amidst ancient trees and shadowy clearings, Emily's unanswered questions linger alongside the cryptic entity that took her away that fateful night. Bigfoot stalked our camp for 3 nights. It was a chilly autumn evening in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. The air smelled of pine and damp earth as we set up camp near Lake Wenatchee. A group of 5 friends, Mark, Jake, Emily, Tom, and Lisa had decided to spend their long weekend exploring this remote wilderness area known for its breathtaking views and serene surroundings. Little did they know that their adventure would turn into something far more terrifying than any of them could have imagined. We arrived at the lake just before sunset on Friday. The golden light cast long shadows across the forest floor, creating an almost magical atmosphere. We chose a spot about half a mile from the water's edge, surrounded by towering fir trees. It felt like stepping into another world, a place untouched by civilization. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and the sounds of the forest came alive around us. Crickets chirped rhythmically, owls hooted in the distance, and occasionally the wind rustled through the branches above. On our first night, everything seemed normal. We gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and laughing under the starlit sky. But sometime after midnight, when most of us were already asleep inside our tents, strange noises began to echo through the woods. At first, it sounded like branches snapping far off in the distance. Then came deeper thuds, as if something heavy was walking nearby. Mark woke up, startled, and whispered loudly enough to wake everyone else. "Did you hear that?" Everyone sat bolt upright, hearts pounding. We unzipped one side of the tent cautiously and peered outside. The moonlight illuminated patches of the forest, but nothing moved within sight. Still, the unsettling feeling lingered. For the rest of the night, none of us slept soundly. Every creak or groan of the trees made us jump. By dawn, we convinced ourselves it must have been bears or other wildlife roaming the area. Saturday passed without incident during daylight hours. We spent the day hiking along trails near the lake, marveling at the vibrant colors of fall leaves blanketing the ground. Yet as dusk approached, the tension returned. That evening, while preparing dinner over the fire, we noticed unusual tracks in the soft soil near the edge of our campsite. They weren't bear prints nor deer hooves. These were enormous footprints, nearly twice the size of a human's, with distinct toe marks. Our laughter faded instantly, replaced by uneasy silence. As darkness enveloped the forest once again, the eerie sounds resumed. This time, however, they were closer, much closer. Branches cracked right outside our tents. Leaves crunched beneath unseen feet. Heavy breathing echoed faintly through the stillness. Panic bubbled up among us. No one dared step out of their tent. Instead, we stayed huddled together, clutching flashlights and whatever makeshift weapons we could find. Each noise sent shivers down our spines. The second night stretched endlessly. Sleep eluded us entirely as we listened intently to every movement outside. Around 3 a.m., a loud crash shook the entire camp. Something had knocked over one of our chairs near the fire pit. Then came a guttural growl, not angry, but rather curious and low-pitched. It sent chills racing up my spine. My hands trembled, holding the flashlight beam steady toward the source of the sound. Nothing showed up in the narrow circle of light. By Sunday morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on all of us. We debated whether to leave immediately or stay put until dark. Reluctantly, we agreed to pack up quickly and head back to civilization. However, fate had other plans. During breakfast preparation, another round of mysterious noises started. Only now, these weren't random. They followed a pattern. Whoever or whatever was out there circled our camp methodically, pausing periodically as though observing us. At this point, fear gripped us tightly. Communication between us became strained, short sentences filled with urgency. "What do we do?" "Stay calm," someone replied, though their voice quivered noticeably. Time slowed down as each second brought new anxiety. Finally, mid-afternoon, we managed to dismantle our gear and load everything onto backpacks. Before departing, we scanned the dense foliage surrounding us one last time. There, hidden partially behind a tree trunk, stood a shadowy figure watching silently. Too tall to be human, covered in thick fur, eyes glowing faintly in reflection of sunlight filtering through canopy. Without hesitation, we fled down the trail as fast as possible. Adrenaline fueled our steps despite fatigue setting in. Looking back confirmed the creature maintained a safe distance behind us, matching our pace effortlessly. Hours later, upon reaching safety at Ranger Station miles away, relief washed over us, mixed with disbelief. Rangers listened patiently to our tale, nodding sympathetically. Some believed us, others didn't. Regardless, those 3 nights remain etched forever in our Memorician encounter no amount of rationalization can erase. Mysterious lights over campsite, then she vanished. It was a crisp autumn evening in the heart of Colorado's Rocky Mountains. The sun had dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. A young woman named Emily sat by her campfire at Willow Creek Campground, enjoying the serenity that only nature could provide. Her tent was pitched just a few feet away, its nylon walls glowing faintly from the firelight. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. Emily had always loved camping. It was her escape from the bustling city life of Denver, where she worked as a graphic designer. She arrived earlier that day, setting up her gear under the watchful gaze of towering evergreens. As night fell, the stars began to appear, their brilliance undiminished by city lights. It was one of those nights when the universe seemed closer, more tangible. Around 8:45 p.m., as Emily sipped her hot cocoa, she noticed something unusual in the distance. Across the clearing, beyond the tree line, there were lights. Not the steady glow of headlights or lanterns, but rather flickering orbs that danced unpredictably. They were too high for flashlights and too erratic for vehicles. Emily's curiosity was piqued. Pause with intrigue. She grabbed her flashlight and approached cautiously, careful not to step on twigs that might alert whatever or whoever was out there. The lights seemed to react to her movement, retreating further into the forest. It was as if they were playing a game of hide-and-seek. Emily felt a mixture of fear and fascination. Her heart pounded in her chest, each beat echoing in her ears. Pause with tension. At around 9:15 p.m., Emily found herself deeper in the woods than she intended. The lights had led her to an old, abandoned logging trail. The path was overgrown, barely visible beneath layers of fallen leaves and moss. Suddenly, the lights stopped moving. They hovered silently, forming a peculiar pattern that resembled constellations. Emily froze, unsure whether to advance or retreat. The atmosphere shifted dramatically. The usual sounds of the forest, the rustling leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl were gone. It was an unnatural silence, heavy and oppressive. Emily's breath came in shallow gasps. Her hands trembled as she reached for her phone to call for help. But there was no signal, just static. Pause with despair. Then, without warning, the lights descended. They moved so quickly that Emily barely had time to react. One moment she was standing. The next, she felt a strange sensation, like being pulled through water. The world around her blurred, colors swirling into an indistinct mass. When the sensation passed, Emily was no longer in the forest. She stood in what appeared to be a cavern, its walls glowing faintly with the same light she had been following. The temperature dropped significantly. Her breath formed clouds in front of her face. The air smelled metallic, almost sterile. Emily called out, her voice trembling, but there was no response. Only echoes returned her cries. She noticed strange symbols etched into the rock walls, patterns that defied any language she recognized. Panic set in as she realized she couldn't remember how she got here. Or why. Pause with confusion. Hours soar, perhaps minutes passed in this surreal environment. Time seemed distorted. Emily wandered aimlessly, searching for an exit. At some point, she stumbled upon a large chamber filled with hovering spheres of light. They pulsed rhythmically, emitting soft tones that resonated deep within her chest. It was both mesmerizing and terrifying. Emily felt drawn to them, unable to resist their pull. As she reached out, everything went black. Back at Willow Creek Campground, park rangers discovered Emily's abandoned campsite the following morning. Her belongings were untouched, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. Search parties scoured the area for days, but there was no trace of her. No footprints, no broken branches, nothing. It was as if the forest had swallowed her whole. Missing boy found alive in unlikely place. The small town of Willow Creek, nestled in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains, was no stranger to whispers of strange occurrences. It was a place where legends were born and secrets lingered in the shadows of towering pines. On an evening that seemed like any other, the air carried a chilling breeze as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. The clock struck 7, and the residents of Willow Creek gathered at the local community center for what would become one of the most unforgettable nights in their history. It all began when 8-year-old Ethan Carter went missing. His disappearance happened so suddenly that it left everyone in disbelief. Ethan had been playing near his home on Maple Street, just a stone's throw away from the forest edge. His mother, Karen, recalled seeing him last around 5:30 p.m., laughing and chasing after butterflies in the backyard. By 6:00 p.m., when she called out for him to come inside for dinner, there was no response. She searched the house, the yard, and even knocked on a few neighbors' doors, but Ethan was nowhere to be found. As word spread through the close-knit community, panic set in. Sheriff Tom Henderson arrived promptly, organizing a search party consisting of volunteers, police officers, and even some curious teenagers eager to help. The initial focus was the dense woods behind Ethan's house, a place many children frequented during warmer months. However, as hours passed, the search proved fruitless. Darkness fell quickly over the mountains, casting long shadows across the landscape. Flashlights flickered among the trees, illuminating patches of underbrush but offering no sign of the missing boy. By midnight, the temperature dropped sharply, and the wind howled through the branches like a mournful cry. Despite the cold, the search continued relentlessly. Dogs sniffed the ground, trying to pick up Ethan's scent, while helicopters buzzed overhead, their spotlights cutting through the darkness. Yet, every lead ended in disappointment. Some suggested he might have wandered deeper into the forest, possibly disoriented or injured. Others whispered about something more sinister, something that locals preferred not to talk about openly. Willow Creek had its share of dark tales, passed down through generations. Stories spoke of a mysterious figure known only as the Watcher, who supposedly roamed the woods at night, preying on those who ventured too far from safety. Though dismissed by most as mere folklore, these stories resurfaced in hushed conversations among the townsfolk that evening. Fear mingled with determination as they pressed on, hoping against hope that Ethan was still alive. At dawn, the search resumed with renewed vigor. This time, however, attention turned to areas less expected. One volunteer, Mark Rivers, proposed checking abandoned buildings scattered throughout the outskirts of town. Among them was the old mill, a crumbling structure located near the riverbank. Once a bustling hub of activity, it now stood silent and desolate, its windows shattered and walls covered in moss. Few dared approach it due to its eerie reputation, but desperation drove the group toward it. Inside the mill, the atmosphere was oppressive. Dust hung thick in the air, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed off the walls. Shadows danced eerily in the dim light filtering through broken panes. As they combed through each room, a peculiar noise caught their attention, a soft whimpering coming from the basement. With hearts pounding, they descended the creaking stairs, flashlights cutting through the gloom. There, huddled in the corner of a dusty alcove, sat Ethan. His clothes were torn and his face smeared with dirt, but he was alive. Relief washed over the rescuers, though it was tinged with confusion and unease. How had Ethan ended up here? More unsettling was the realization that someone or something had kept him hidden. Evidence suggested deliberate effort. Blankets arranged neatly beside him, food wrappers scattered nearby, and strange carvings etched into the wooden beams above. Ethan's condition raised more questions than answers. When questioned gently by Sheriff Henderson, the boy recounted fragments of his ordeal. He remembered wandering into the woods, becoming lost amid the towering trees. Then, he spoke of a mantle, shadowy and unnervingly calm, who appeared seemingly out of nowhere. This man led Ethan to the mill, claiming it was safe and warm. Ethan couldn't explain why he trusted him, only that something about the man felt oddly familiar, as if he'd seen him before in dreams. Further investigation revealed additional anomalies. Footprints leading to the mill matched neither Ethan's nor those of the search party members. A single boot print remained near the entrance, impossibly large and deeply embedded in the hard-packed earth. Inside the mill, investigators discovered remnants of candles placed strategically around the space, forming patterns that defied logic. Most disturbingly, a journal was found tucked beneath a loose floorboard. Its pages contained cryptic entries written in a hand unfamiliar to anyone in town. References to the Chosen and Guardians of the Threshold littered the text, hinting at rituals performed within the mill's confines. Word of Ethan's rescue spread rapidly, bringing both relief and unease to Willow Creek. While celebrations erupted in some corners of the town, others grew increasingly wary. Parents warned their children to stay clear of the woods, and late-night gatherings dwindled as paranoia took root. Theories abounded regarding Ethan's captor, ranging from a reclusive hermit living in the wilderness to supernatural entities drawn to vulnerable souls. Months later, the case remained unsolved. Authorities pursued leads but ultimately concluded that without concrete evidence, little could be done. Ethan returned to school, though changes in his behavior became apparent. He became quieter, often staring off into the distance, with an expression that suggested he saw things no one else could. At night, he claimed to hear whispers calling his name, urging him back to the mill. For the people of Willow Creek, life slowly returned to normaler, as normal as it could be given the lingering mystery. Yet, whenever the wind swept through the valley, carrying with it the scent of pine and damp earth, memories of that fateful night resurfaced. And deep within the forest, amidst the rustling leaves and chirping crickets, the legend of the Watcher lived on, waiting patiently for another soul to claim. Pause here. Let the silence sink in. Let listeners feel the weight of uncertainty hanging heavy in the air. Though Ethan was found alive, the true nature of his ordeal remains shrouded in mystery. Was it human intervention or something far beyond comprehension? The question lingers, haunting the minds of those who dare delve too deeply into the secrets of Willow Creek. As years pass, new generations grow up hearing tales of the boy who vanished and the unlikely place where he was found. But perhaps the greatest mystery lies not in what happened to Ethan, but rather in what continues to watch from the shadows, unseen yet ever present. The woods went silent before he disappeared. The woods went silent before he disappeared. It was a crisp autumn evening in the small town of Black Hollow, nestled deep within the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. The sun had dipped below the horizon just an hour ago, casting long shadows across the forest that surrounded the community. A chill hung in the air, and the leaves crunched underfoot as people made their way home from work or school. This was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where children played freely outside until twilight called them back indoors. But on this particular night, something felt off. The name John Carter wasn't unfamiliar to anyone in Black Hollow. He was the local park ranger who had dedicated over 2 decades of his life to preserving the wilderness surrounding the town. With his weathered face and warm smile, he was beloved by all, always ready with advice for hikers or stories about the animals that roamed the woods. That day, however, John ventured deeper into the forest than usual. It was supposed to be a routine checkup of some old logging trails that hadn't been used in years, but it would turn out to be anything but ordinary. At precisely 6:15 p.m., John sent a quick text message to his wife, Emily, heading out for a short patrol, shouldn't take more than an hour. Those were the last words she ever received from him. By 8:00 p.m., when he still hadn't returned, Emily began to worry. She tried calling his phone multiple times, but there was no answer. The signal in those parts of the forest could sometimes be spotty, so she decided to wait another hour before contacting anyone else. But as the clock struck 9, her unease grew into full-blown panic. By then, several neighbors had noticed John's absence too. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit community, and soon enough, a search party was organized. Armed with flashlights and radios, a group of 10 volunteers set off into the woods, following the faint trail John might have taken. The atmosphere was tense. Even the rustling of leaves seemed louder than usual. As they walked, one member of the group pointed out how unusually quiet the forest had become. No chirping crickets, no hooting owls, not even the distant call of a fox. Just silence. This eerie stillness unnerved everyone, and whispers of unease rippled through the group. One man suggested turning back, saying the woods didn't feel right tonight. Another disagreed, reminding everyone why they were here. They pressed on, their footsteps crunching against the carpet of fallen leaves. After about 20 minutes, they reached the edge of a clearing where John's truck sat abandoned. Its headlights were off, and the keys were still in the ignition. Everything looked normal except for one thing. The door was slightly ajar, as if whoever had been inside had left in a hurry. "Something's wrong," muttered Daniel, one of the older members of the group. His voice trembled slightly, betraying his fear. John wouldn't leave his truck like this. The others nodded solemnly, their faces pale in the glow of their flashlights. Carefully, they approached the vehicle, scanning the area for any signs of disturbance. There were none. No tire tracks, no footprints, nothing to indicate struggle or haste. It was as though John had simply vanished into thin air. As the hours dragged on, the search expanded. More people joined in, bringing dogs and drones to cover larger areas, yet despite their efforts, there was no trace of John Carter anywhere. Days turned into weeks, and eventually, the official search was called off. Still, the townsfolk refused to give up hope. Every now and then, someone would claim to have seen a shadow moving between the trees at night, or heard strange noises coming from the woods. These sightings only fueled speculation and fear among the residents of Black Hollow. Years later, a young boy named Marcus stumbled upon something while playing near the outskirts of the forest. Hidden beneath a pile of mossy rocks, he found a tattered notebook belonging to John Carter. Inside, the pages were filled with cryptic entries detailing strange occurrences in the woods. He spoke of hearing whispers when no one was around, feeling eyes watching him from the darkness, and sensing an overwhelming presence whenever he entered certain parts of the forest. The final entry read, "I don't know what's happening anymore. The woods, they're alive. I can feel it. And they want me." Marcus showed the notebook to his parents, who immediately brought it to the authorities. Experts examined the writings closely, trying to make sense of what John might have encountered. Some dismissed it as paranoia brought on by years of isolation in the wild. Others weren't so sure. The mystery of John Carter's disappearance remains unsolved to this day, haunting the people of Black Hollow and serving as a chilling reminder that some secrets are best left buried. And so, whenever the wind howls through the trees and the forest falls silent once more, the residents of Black Hollow remember the man who disappeared without a trace and wonder if perhaps, somewhere deep within the woods, he's still listening, waiting, watching. Entire search party vanished in National Park. It was a crisp autumn morning in the heart of Yellowstone National Park when an experienced search party vanished without a trace. The park, vast and untamed, stretched endlessly under a sky painted with hues of orange and blue. It was October, and the air carried a chill that sent shivers down the spines of those who dared venture deep into its wilderness. This is the story of 5 individuals. Mark, Emily, Jacob, Lily, and Tomashu embarked on what should have been a routine mission, but ended up disappearing forever. The group had assembled at dawn near the Old Faithful Geyser area, a place bustling with tourists eager to witness nature's clockwork eruption. They were tasked with locating another missing hiker reported 2 days prior. Mark, the leader of the team, stood tall among them, his voice steady as he briefed everyone before they set out. We'll follow the trail south toward Shoshone Lake, he said firmly, pausing for effect. Stay together and keep your radios on at all times. His tone carried authority, yet there was a hint of unease beneath it, something only someone familiar with him could detect. Emily, the youngest of the group, adjusted her backpack nervously while glancing around at the towering pines surrounding them. She had always loved the outdoors but felt uneasy this morning, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Jacob, a seasoned ranger known for his sharp wit and quick thinking, gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry, kid," he joked lightly, clapping her shoulder. "If anything weird happens, I'll protect you from the bears." His laughter echoed briefly through the trees, breaking some of the tension hanging in the air. Lily, the biologist of the group, scribbled notes in her journal about the local flora and fauna, her mind preoccupied by the strange behavior of birds she'd observed earlier that week. "They've been unusually quiet," she murmured softly to herself, more concerned than curious now. Thomas, the tech specialist responsible for maintaining communication equipment, double-checked each device meticulously. He nodded confidently once everything seemed operational, though deep inside he harbored doubts about how reliable these gadgets would be deep within the forest where signals often faltered. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden light over the dense woods, the group began their trek along well-marked trails leading deeper into the park's interior. At first, everything appeared normal: the crunch of leaves underfoot, the distant calls of wildlife, the occasional rustle of wind through branches. But as hours passed and the landscape grew increasingly remote, subtle changes started creeping into their surroundings. Around midday, just as they approached a secluded meadow surrounded by ancient evergreens, the atmosphere shifted abruptly. A sudden silence enveloped the area, so profound it felt unnatural. Not even the faintest whisper of breeze stirred the leaves above them. Mark stopped abruptly, raising a hand to signal caution. "Something doesn't feel right," he whispered hoarsely, his brow furrowed in concentration. The others exchanged wary glances, sensing the same oppressive stillness pressing against their senses like an invisible weight. And then came the sound, a low, guttural growl emanating from somewhere beyond the tree line. It wasn't the kind of noise associated with any known animal species in the park. It was deeper, darker, almost otherworldly. Jacob instinctively reached for his flashlight, flicking it on despite the daylight. "What the hell was that?" he demanded sharply, his usual humor replaced by raw anxiety. No one answered immediately. Instead, they listened intently, waiting for whatever made that sound to reveal itself. Minutes dragged on, heavy with anticipation. By late afternoon, the situation worsened dramatically. Their GPS devices malfunctioned simultaneously, displaying erratic readings that defied logic. Radio transmissions became garbled, voices distorted beyond recognition. Panic bubbled beneath the surface as frustration mounted. "This isn't possible," Thomas exclaimed angrily, slamming his fist against a tree trunk in frustration. Lily examined the ground closely, noting peculiar tracks unlike anything she'd seen before, too large, too symmetrical, too alien. Her scientific curiosity clashed violently with growing dread gnawing at her resolve. Night fell swiftly, plunging the forest into darkness so thick it seemed tangible. Fires crackled weakly, providing little comfort against the encroaching shadows. One by one, members of the group disappeared mysteriously, leaving behind no evidence or explanation. First was Thomas, who wandered off claiming he saw movement in the bushes nearby. Then Jacob, drawn away by phantom whispers calling his name. Emily screamed moments later, her cries fading into silence before anyone could reach her location. Only Mark and Lily remained, huddled together in terror as unseen forces closed in around them. In the final hours of their ordeal, they stumbled upon an ancient stone structure hidden deep within the woods, its origins unknown and purpose unclear. Symbols carved into the walls glowed faintly in the moonlight, pulsating rhythmically as if alive. Mark touched one hesitantly, triggering a chain reaction that sealed their fate. The last transmission intercepted by authorities consisted solely of static punctuated by muffled screams and unintelligible pleas for help. Only his camera found after he disappeared. The sun was setting over the dense woods of Blackwater National Park in Maryland, casting long shadows across the rugged terrain. It was late afternoon when a young man named Ethan Carter set out on what would be his final hike. He had arrived at the park earlier that day, eager to capture the beauty of the forest with his camera. Ethan was known for his passion for photography and often ventured into remote areas to find the perfect shot. This time, however, he disappeared without a trace, leaving behind only his camera. Ethan had planned a solo trip to explore the less-traveled trails deep within the park. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Birds chirped softly in the distance, their calls echoing through the trees. Ethan carried his backpack, which contained his camera, extra batteries, water, and some snacks. He had informed the park rangers about his intended route, but assured them it wouldn't take long. "I'll be back before sunset," he had said with a confident smile. As the hours passed, Ethan wandered deeper into the forest, captivated by the play of light filtering through the canopy above. Time seemed to slip away as he focused on capturing each breathtaking scene. Around 4 o'clock, he reached an area where the trail became narrower and more overgrown. The atmosphere shifted subtly, the once lively sounds of wildlife grew quieter, replaced by an eerie stillness. A faint chill ran down Ethan's spine, though he brushed it off as nothing more than his imagination. By 5 o'clock, the sunlight had faded considerably, and the woods took on a darker, more ominous tone. Ethan paused to check his map, realizing he might have strayed slightly from the marked path. Concerned, but not yet alarmed, he decided to retrace his steps. As he turned around, however, something caught his eye: a strange symbol carved into the bark of a nearby tree. It looked ancient, almost ritualistic, and sent a shiver up his spine. He quickly snapped a photo, hoping to examine it more closely later. Little did he know, this image would become one of the last pieces of evidence of his existence. Hours went by, and night began to fall. Ethan's unease grew as the darkness enveloped him completely. The temperature dropped sharply, and the silence was now absolute, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. At some point, Ethan must have stumbled or fallen because his belongings were later found scattered near a cluster of boulders. His backpack lay open, its contents spilled out, including his water bottle and snacks. Most disturbingly, his camera remained intact, as if deliberately left behind. When Ethan failed to return to the ranger station by morning, a search party was immediately organized. Volunteers scoured the park, calling out his name and following any potential leads. Days turned into weeks, yet no sign of Ethan emerged beyond those initial items. The photos stored in his camera provided little clarity. Among the usual landscape shots, there were several images of the mysterious symbol, along with one particularly unsettling photograph. In it, a shadowy figure appeared just outside the frame, barely visible among the trees. Zooming in revealed nothing definitive, but the feeling of being watched lingered heavily in the minds of those who viewed it. Local legends whispered of Blackwater National Park's dark history. For generations, people spoke of an entity that roamed the woods, preying on those who ventured too far from safety. Some called it the Watcher, claiming it lured victims deep into the forest before vanishing with them forever. Skeptics dismissed these tales as mere folklore, but the disappearance of Ethan Carter reignited old fears among the community. Interviews with friends and family painted a picture of a kind-hearted young man who loved adventure but never took unnecessary risks. His absence defied logic, leaving everyone searching for answers they might never uncover. Years later, hikers occasionally report strange occurrences in the same region where Ethan vanished. Shadows moving between the trees, whispers carried on the wind, and an overwhelming sense of dread are all described by those brave enough to venture there alone. Despite numerous investigations and expeditions, no concrete evidence has surfaced to explain Ethan's fate. His camera remains the sole relic of that fateful day, a silent witness to whatever transpired in the depths of Blackwater National Park. She vanished hiking and reappeared without memory. On a crisp autumn morning in the small town of Ashwood, nestled deep within the sprawling Cascade Range, Emily Carter decided to embark on her favorite pastime, hiking. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden hues over the dense forest and jagged peaks surrounding her. She had chosen the infamous Black Hollow Trail, known for its breathtaking vistas but also whispered tales of strange occurrences. Emily carried with her a backpack filled with essentials: water bottles, snacks, a flashlight, and her trusty camera. Her heart swelled with excitement as she stepped onto the trail at 6:45 a.m., eager to capture the beauty of nature before the day grew too bright. The air was cool and refreshing, carrying the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. Birds chirped melodiously overhead, and the occasional rustle of leaves hinted at unseen creatures moving through the underbrush. As Emily climbed higher, the path became steeper, winding through towering trees that seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky. By mid-morning, she reached an overlook where the valley below unfolded like a patchwork quilt of greens and browns. She paused here, snapping photos while marveling at the serene landscape. However, something felt off. A faint unease crept into her mind, though she couldn't quite place why. She shrugged it off, attributing it to fatigue or perhaps the solitude of the wilderness. At around noon, Emily arrived at a fork in the trail. One path led straight ahead, continuing upward toward the summit, while the other veered sharply to the left, descending into what locals called the Shadow Glen. Despite warnings from friends about this section being less traveled and rumored to be eerie, curiosity got the better of her. With a determined smile, she took the left turn, her boots crunching softly against the gravel beneath her feet. As she ventured deeper into the glen, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy above, leaving the area dimly lit even during daylight hours. The temperature dropped noticeably, and an unsettling silence enveloped her. No birds sang, no wind stirred the branches. It was as if the forest itself held its breath. Emily quickened her pace, feeling increasingly uneasy. At one point, she thought she heard footsteps behind her, soft, deliberate, and unnervingly close, but when she turned, there was nothing but empty trees. Time seemed to lose all meaning as she walked. Hours might have passed, or perhaps mere minutes. It was impossible to tell. Eventually, exhaustion overwhelmed her, and she decided to rest by a large boulder near a narrow stream. Sitting down, she sipped some water and glanced around cautiously. That's when she noticed the symbols carved into the bark of nearby trees. Strange, swirling patterns resembling ancient runes caught her eye, their origins unknown. Fear prickled along her spine, but before she could investigate further, darkness claimed her. When Emily woke up, she found herself lying on cold, hard ground. Panic surged through her as she realized she had no memory of falling asleep or anything else for that matter. Her surroundings were unfamiliar, and the once familiar sounds of the forest now seemed alien and hostile. Worst of all, her watch was missing, and her phone lay shattered beside her, its screen cracked beyond repair. Confusion gave way to terror as she stumbled forward, calling out for help in a trembling voice. "Hello? Is anyone there?" she shouted, her voice cracking with desperation, but the only response was the haunting echo of her own words. Hours or maybe days passed as Emily wandered aimlessly through the woods. Hunger gnawed at her stomach and thirst burned her throat. Shadows danced eerily around her, taking shapes that made her blood run cold. At night, strange noises echoed through the forest, low growls, distant whispers, and the sound of twigs snapping far too often to be coincidental. Each step felt heavier than the last, yet she pressed on, driven by sheer willpower in the hope of finding safety. Then came the moment that would forever haunt her dreams. On the third evening or so, she guessed Emily stumbled upon a clearing bathed in moonlight. In the center stood a massive stone altar, its surface covered in dried moss and strange carvings identical to those she'd seen earlier on the tree trunks. Surrounding it were several figures cloaked in tattered robes, their faces obscured by hoods. They moved in unison, chanting in a guttural language she didn't recognize. Paralyzed with fear, Emily watched as they placed a glowing object atop the altar, crystal-like structure, pulsating with an unnatural light. Before she could react, one of the figures turned toward her, pointing a skeletal finger directly at her position. The next thing she knew, everything went black again. When Emily finally emerged from the forest 2 weeks later, she was barely recognizable. Rescuers found her wandering near the edge of Black Hollow Trail, disoriented and muttering incoherently. Her clothes were torn, her skin pale and gaunt, and her eyes held a vacant stare that chilled those who looked into them. When questioned, Emily could provide little information. She remembered starting her hike, but nothing after entering the Shadow Glen. Most disturbingly, she insisted she hadn't been alone, that someone, or something, had been watching her every move. Doctors examined Emily thoroughly, searching for physical explanations for her condition. While malnourishment and dehydration accounted for some symptoms, others remained inexplicable. MRI scans revealed unusual activity in certain regions of her brain, suggesting trauma or exposure to phenomena beyond conventional understanding. Psychologists attempted to piece together fragments of her lost memories through hypnosis, but each session ended abruptly when Emily screamed and clutched her head in agony. News of Emily's disappearance and miraculous return spread quickly throughout Ashwood, reigniting old legends about the Black Hollow Trail. Some spoke of cursed lands guarded by spirits angered by human intrusion. Others whispered of secret cults practicing dark rituals deep within the forest. Whatever the truth may be, Emily refused to speak of it publicly. Instead, she locked herself away in her home, haunted by nightmares and plagued by fleeting images of glowing crystals and hooded figures. Serial killer hid victims in plain sight. The small town of Willow Creek, nestled deep within the heart of rural America, was known for its serene beauty and tight-knit community. The rolling hills, lush forests, and picturesque farms painted a tranquil image that attracted visitors year-round. Yet beneath this idyllic surface lay a chilling secretone, so sinister it would haunt the townspeople long after the truth came to light. It all began on a crisp autumn morning when Emma Carter, a local librarian with an insatiable curiosity, noticed something peculiar about Mr. Grayson, the reclusive owner of the antique shop downtown. For years, he had been regarded as nothing more than a quiet man who preferred solitude over socializing. But whispers began circulating around town when several residents went missing without explanation. At first, people dismissed these disappearances as coincidence accidents or perhaps someone leaving town quietly, but then came the discovery that changed everything. Mr. Grayson lived in a modest house at the edge of Willow Creek, surrounded by dense woods that seemed almost alive with mystery. His home, though unassuming from the outside, concealed horrors beyond comprehension. It wasn't until Detective Marcus Lane arrived from the neighboring city to investigate the string of disappearances that the pieces started falling into place. What they uncovered inside Grayson's home sent shockwaves through the entire nation. The investigation began one foggy evening when Emma approached Detective Lane with her concerns. She recounted how Grayson often spoke cryptically about collecting treasures during their rare conversations at the bookstore. Her instincts told her there was more to his words than met the eye. Lane listened intently, noting the unease in Emma's voice and deciding to pay Grayson a visit early the next morning. Grayson answered the door calmly, inviting them inside with what appeared to be genuine hospitality. As Lane and Emma stepped into the living room, they were struck by how normal everything seemed at first glance. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with novels and historical texts. A fireplace crackled softly in the corner, casting a warm glow across the space. But as Lane scanned the room, his trained eye caught details others might have missed. Photographs carefully arranged on the mantel, each depicting individuals whose faces were eerily familiar yet impossible to place. Detective Lane asked Grayson about the photos, casually mentioning some of the missing persons cases plaguing the town. To his surprise, Grayson didn't flinch. Instead, he smiled faintly, explaining that those people were part of his collection, a term that sent chills down Emma's spine. He spoke matter-of-factly, as if discussing hobbies rather than human lives. It became clear that Grayson saw himself not as a killer, but as a curator, preserving what he believed to be beautiful souls forever trapped in time. As the hours passed, Lane pressed further, observing every detail of the house. In the basement, hidden behind a false wall, lay the horrifying truth. Row upon row of glass jars filled with preserved body parts stood like morbid trophies under dim lighting. Among them were personal belongings, watches, jewelry, even letter siege tied to someone who had vanished from Willow Creek. The air grew heavy with dread as Lane realized the extent of Grayson's depravity. Meanwhile, upstairs, Emma discovered another shocking revelation. Hidden within the attic was a series of meticulously kept journals detailing Grayson's interactions with his victims. Each entry revealed a twisted fascination with their lives, capturing mundane moments before their fateful encounters with him. Reading through the pages, Emma felt her stomach churn as she understood how Grayson had manipulated trust and friendship to lure unsuspecting victims into his web. Back in the basement, Lane confronted Grayson directly, demanding answers. With eerie calmness, Grayson admitted to hiding his victims right under the town's nose, manipulating their routines until they became isolated enough to disappear unnoticed. He described how he chose targets based on specific traits: kindness, vulnerability, or simply being out of place, and how he integrated himself into their lives subtly, becoming indispensable yet invisible. As dawn broke over Willow Creek, authorities swarmed the property, uncovering evidence that confirmed Grayson's crimes. Neighbors gathered outside, whispering in disbelief as news spread throughout the town. How could such evil exist among them, and why hadn't anyone noticed sooner? Questions lingered in the air, unanswered but ever present. The once peaceful community now bore scars that would take generations to heal. In the weeks following Grayson's arrest, therapy sessions became common practice in Willow Creek. Residents struggled to reconcile their memories of him with the monstrous reality. Children played less freely near the woods where Grayson once roamed, while adults cast wary glances toward strangers passing through town. Even years later, whenever fog rolled in or wind rustled through the trees, echoes of fear remained etched in the collective psyche of Willow Creek's inhabitants. For Detective Lane, solving the case brought little satisfaction. The weight of knowing how many lives had been shattered haunted him daily. He often returned to the journal entries found in the attic, searching for patterns or clues that might have prevented the tragedy. Each word written by Grayson served as a grim reminder of humanity's capacity for darkness and the importance of vigilance against it. And Emma? She never fully recovered from what she witnessed. Though grateful for having helped bring justice, she couldn't shake the feeling that something darker still lurked within Willow Creek's shadows. On quiet nights, she'd sit by her window staring out at the forest where Grayson used to walk. Sometimes she swore she saw movement among the tree shapes, too fleeting to confirm, but impossible to ignore. Were they figments of her imagination or remnants of Grayson's influence lingering long after his capture? The answer remained elusive, leaving only questions hanging in the silence. Years later, Willow Creek tried to move forward, rebuilding its identity piece by painstaking piece. Memorials were erected for the lost souls, serving both as tributes and warnings to future generations. Yet no amount of healing could erase the scars carved into the land itself. Visitors sometimes reported strange sensations walking through the woods, claiming they heard whispers carried on the breeze or worse, saw figures watching them from afar. Locals warned newcomers away from certain trails, citing folklore born of real events. Though Grayson eventually faced trial and imprisonment, his legacy endured in ways no one anticipated. Psychologists studied his methods, attempting to understand the psychology behind his actions. Writers penned books exploring the case, drawing attention to the dangers of complacency in small-town life. And filmmakers captured the essence of horror in documentaries and movies inspired by the true story. Through it all, one thing remained constant: the knowledge that evil can hide anywhere, even in plain sight. He escaped a serial killer's dungeon alive. It was a cold, dark night in the small town of Pine Hollow, USA. The kind of night where shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and every sound carried an eerie echo through the quiet streets. This is the story of James Carter, a 28-year-old mechanic who would never forget what happened that fateful evening. James had been working late at his auto shop on the outskirts of town. It was one of those days when time seemed to slip away unnoticed. He glanced at the clock, 10:47 p.m., and decided it was finally time to head home. As he locked up the shop, he noticed something strange about his car. The battery cable had been cut cleanly. Confused but not overly concerned, James called a local towing service. The operator said it would be about 30 minutes before someone could get to him. Standing under the dim light of the shop's security lamp, James tried to shake off the growing unease in his gut. The air felt heavier than usual, and the silence around him seemed almost oppressive. At exactly 11:15 p.m., a black van pulled into the driveway. The driver introduced himself as Tom from Reliable Towing. Something about the man set James's instincts on high alert. Tom's demeanor was too calm, too deliberate. But before James could act on his intuition, everything went black. When James woke up, he found himself chained to a cold concrete wall in what appeared to be a basement. The room smelled of damp earth and something metallic: blood. His head throbbed painfully from where he'd been hit. Slowly, his eyes adjusted to the dim light coming from a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. The first thing James noticed was the collection of tools neatly arranged on a long workbench. Surgical instruments, ropes, knives, all meticulously organized. His stomach churned as he realized the horrifying truth: he was in the lair of a serial killer. The second thing he noticed were the photographs pinned to the wall opposite him. Each showed a different person, all bearing similar injuries. Some were crossed out with red marker. Days passed in that nightmare world. Or maybe it was weeks. Time lost all meaning in the underground dungeon. The captor, whose real name James never learned, visited sporadically. Sometimes to bring food, sometimes just to stand there in silence, watching him with an unsettling intensity. But then came the moment that changed everything. One night, while their captor was distracted by a phone call upstairs, James managed to loosen his chains using a piece of broken glass he'd hidden during one of his feeder visits. The opportunity was fleeting, but James knew this might be his only chance. Moving silently despite his aching body, James navigated through the labyrinthine basement. Every step echoed ominously in the stillness. His heart pounded so loudly he feared it would give him away. Finally, he reached a heavy metal door. It took several agonizing minutes to pry it open enough to squeeze through. The fresh night air hit him like a physical force. Freedom tasted sweeter than anything he'd ever known. But his ordeal wasn't over yet. James needed to find help without leading anyone back to the dungeon. Stumbling through the woods surrounding the property, he eventually reached a rural highway. A passing truck driver stopped when he saw James's disheveled state. The man called the police immediately. When authorities searched the location James described, they uncovered horrors beyond comprehension. Multiple bodies, each showing signs of prolonged captivity and torture. Evidence suggested the killer had been operating for years. James spent months recovering physically and psychologically. The trauma would stay with him forever, but he also became a symbol of hope for others. By surviving against impossible odds, he helped bring justice to victims who couldn't speak for themselves. And though he'll never forget those dark days in the dungeon, James chooses to focus on living fully in the present. The case remains open as authorities continue searching for the elusive predator. Meanwhile, James has dedicated his life to raising awareness about human trafficking and supporting other survivors. In the quiet moments when memories threaten to overwhelm him, he reminds himself of the simple truth that kept him going through those darkest hours. Life is precious and worth fighting for, no matter the cost. This is James Carter's story, a tale of survival, resilience, and triumph over unimaginable horror. And though the scars may never fully fade, they serve as a powerful reminder of the human spirit's incredible capacity to endure. Even in the face of pure evil, the town of Pine Hollow has mostly returned to normal, though some say they can still hear faint cries echoing through the forest on quiet nights. Whether it's just the wind or something more sinister remains unknown. What we do know is that James Carter's courage continues to inspire countless others facing their own personal darkness. Proof that even in our lowest moments, there's always a chance for light. Last photo of hiker revealed horrifying detail. The last photo of hiker revealed horrifying detail. A soft breeze swept through the dense forest of Mount Rainier National Park as Emily Carter prepared for her morning hike. The sun had barely risen above the horizon, casting a golden glow over the mist-covered trees at 6:15 a.m. Her breath created small clouds in the crisp mountain air as she adjusted her backpack and checked her camera one last time. The park rangers had warned about the unpredictable weather, but Emily felt confident with her years of hiking experience. At 7:30 a.m., Emily reached the first significant landmark, an ancient cedar tree that stood like a guardian at the edge of the trail. She paused to take a few photos, capturing the way the sunlight filtered through the thick canopy. Little did she know this would be one of the last normal moments of her journey. By 9:45 a.m., the trail had become increasingly difficult, with roots snaking across the path and rocks covered in moss. Emily's GPS signal began to weaken, causing her to feel a slight unease. Still, she pressed on, driven by her passion for discovering hidden beauty in nature. Around noon, she arrived at a secluded clearing where wildflowers painted the ground in vibrant colors. It was here she took what would later become known as the horrifying photo. Emily noticed something peculiar about half a mile ahead, what appeared to be a large shadow moving between the trees despite the stillness of the forest. Her heart rate quickened as she raised her camera to capture the strange phenomenon. The digital display showed 12:37 p.m. when she snapped the image. Feeling both exhilarated and unnerved, she decided to turn back. As darkness fell around 6:00 p.m., Emily realized she was completely lost. Panic set in as she called emergency services, only to hear static on her phone. The temperature dropped rapidly, and unnatural sounds began echoing through the woods, low growls and whispers that made her blood run cold. She managed to send a final text message to her family before her phone died completely. 3 days later, search and rescue teams found Emily's abandoned backpack near the ancient cedar tree. Inside, they discovered her camera still intact. When the photos were reviewed, investigators froze at the final image. In the background, clearly visible among the trees, was the silhouette of a figure standing far too still. Its posture was unnatural, with limbs positioned in ways human anatomy shouldn't allow. Worst of all, the figure seemed to be staring directly at Emily from a distance impossible to cover in the time between shots. The discovery sent shockwaves through the community. Local legends spoke of a creature known to wander these woods, preying on those who ventured too deep into its territory. Park rangers increased patrols and issued warnings to hikers, but nothing could explain the chilling details captured in that final photograph. Months passed, yet Emily remained missing. Her family held on to hope, while experts debated the authenticity of the image. Skeptics claimed it was merely a trick of light, while believers pointed out inconsistencies that defied natural explanation. The debate continued until another hiker disappeared under similar circumstances 2 years later. Today, visitors to Mount Rainier often report strange sensations along that particular trail, a feeling of being watched, cold spots appearing out of nowhere, and eerie noises that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. Rangers have documented multiple instances of equipment malfunctioning, specifically in the area where Emily vanished. The National Park Service maintains official records of these incidents, though many details remain classified. What happened to Emily Carter remains one of the great unsolved mysteries of American wilderness lore. Some say her camera still operates somewhere deep within the forest, endlessly snapping pictures of whatever moves through the shadows. Visitors are advised to tread carefully through these parts. For those who dare to explore after dark, locals warn of a presence that lingers just beyond sight. They say if you ever find yourself alone in the woods and hear faint footsteps following your every move, don't look back. Just keep walking until you reach safety. The forest holds many secrets, and some believe it will never give up its most terrifying truths. The last photo serves as a grim reminder of what lies hidden in the darkness. Waiting, watching, always watching. Hidden Room revealed our family's dark secret. The hidden room revealed our family's dark secret. It was a chilly autumn evening in the small town of Ashwood, Ohio. The air carried an eerie stillness as golden leaves swirled around our old Victorian house on Maple Street. This wasn't just any house. It had been in my family for generations, passed down like some kind of cursed heirloom. My name is Ethan Carter, and I grew up hearing stories about this place from my grandmother, Margaret. She would sit by the fireplace during winter nights, her voice trembling as she spoke of strange occurrences within these walls. Our home stood 3 stories tall with intricate wood carvings along its facade. It had 20 rooms, but one door always remained locked, the one at the end of the second-floor hallway. Grandma warned us never to go near it when we were children. That room holds things best left undisturbed, she'd say, her eyes wide with fear. But curiosity gnawed at me over the years. One stormy night in late October, everything changed. Lightning illuminated the sky outside while rain pounded against the windows. My parents, Thomas and Emily Carter, had gone out to visit relatives, leaving me alone with my younger brother Liam, who was only 10 at the time. We decided to play hide and seek to pass the time. As fate would have it, my turn to hide led me back to that forbidden corridor. I approached the mysterious door cautiously. Its brass handle felt cold beneath my fingertips. A sudden gust of wind slammed shut another door somewhere downstairs, making me jump. Still, something compelled me to twist that handle. To my surprise, it turned easily. The lock must have broken after all these years. Pause with anticipation. Inside, the room was pitch black until my flashlight revealed cobwebs hanging from the ceiling like ghostly curtains. Dust covered every surface, preserving whatever secrets lay hidden here for decades. That's when I noticed them. Dozens of wooden crates stacked neatly against the walls. Each bore labels written in faded ink. 1,923, 1,937, 1,937, 952. They spanned nearly a century. Liam joined me moments later, his face pale under the dim light. Together, we began opening those crates, each discovery more unsettling than the last. Inside were photographs of people I didn't recognize, men, women, even children, all bearing striking resemblances to members of our own family. Some pictures showed them smiling, others depicted scenes far too disturbing to describe. Then came the journals, handwritten accounts detailing experiments conducted by someone named Dr. Jonathan Monroe, a distant ancestor whose existence I'd never known before that night. According to these writings, he believed humans possessed untapped potential which could be unlocked through extreme measures. What followed in those pages chilled us to our core. Descriptions of surgical procedures performed without consent, injections containing unknown substances, subjects kept isolated in basements or attics. But what truly horrified us was discovering connections between these atrocities and our immediate family tree. Names mentioned in the journals matched those etched onto tombstones in the local cemetery where we'd often visited during holidays. Even worse, certain entries hinted at survivors being integrated back into society, unaware of what they'd endured. As dawn broke, casting weak sunlight through dirty window panes, we realized how much deeper this secret went. Conversations with neighbors revealed whispered tales about missing persons throughout Ashwood's history, individuals who vanished without explanation, only to reappear years later, acting strangely different. Could they have been part of Dr. Monroe's twisted legacy? Days turned into weeks as Liam and I delved further into uncovering the truth. We found hidden compartments behind bookshelves revealing additional documents, blueprints showing modifications made to various sections of the house, including soundproof chambers below ground level. One particularly chilling find was audio recordings stored on fragile reels dated mid-20th century. When played, they contained voices pleading for help mixed with laughter that sounded anything but human. Eventually, we confronted our parents about everything we'd discovered. At first, denial clouded their responses, but persistence paid off. They admitted knowing fragments of this dark past, yet chose silence, believing ignorance safer for future generations. However, learning such monstrous acts tied directly to our lineage forced tough decisions upon us all. Together, we sought guidance from experts specializing in historical preservation and ethics regarding sensitive information. Under professional supervision, contents from that hidden room were carefully documented, then securely archived, ensuring no harm could come from them again. Additionally, efforts initiated towards creating awareness programs, educating communities about dangers posed by unchecked ambition disguised as scientific progress. Years have passed since that fateful night. Now adults living separate lives across America, Liam and I maintain contact, regularly discussing updates related to ongoing research surrounding Dr. Monroe's work. Though closure remains elusive, given complexities involved, acknowledging reality empowers us rather than letting fear control our existence. Ashwood itself transformed significantly thanks partly due to revelations brought forth. Former residents once reluctant sharing personal experiences now form support networks helping heal collective trauma inflicted generations ago. Buildings previously shrouded mystery opened their doors, welcoming visitors eager to learn lessons taught harshly through history. So whenever anyone asks why I carry cautious optimism despite challenges faced daily life, remember words spoken softly grandmother many years ago, sitting beside warm fire. Sometimes knowing hard truths better than remaining blissfully ignorant. And though shadows linger corners mind, reminding ever-present danger, lurking darkness, promise myself continue fighting. Ensure light prevails ultimately. Babysitter discovered killer hiding under the bed. It was a chilly autumn evening in the small town of Maplewood, USA. The air was crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and the faint hum of distant traffic. Emily Carter, a 22-year-old college student, had taken up babysitting as a part-time job to help pay for her tuition. She was well liked by the families in the neighborhood for her cheerful demeanor and responsible nature. This particular night, she was looking after little Jake Thompson, a curious 4-year-old boy who loved dinosaurs and superheroes. The Thompson family lived on the corner of Elm Street in a cozy 2-story house with white picket fences and a neatly trimmed garden. Mrs. Thompson had explained that they would be out for dinner and a movie at the local theater, returning no later than 10 o'clock. She handed Emily an envelope with cash for her fee and gave her a warm smile before leaving. "Jake's bedtime is 8:30, she reminded kindly. "He usually goes down without much fuss." Emily nodded reassuringly, waving goodbye as the car pulled away. Inside the house, everything seemed peaceful. Jake was playing with his toy cars in the living room while Emily prepared snacks for them both. The clock ticked steadily on the wall, marking each passing minute. At 7:30, they sat together on the couch watching an animated movie about talking animals. Jake giggled at the jokes, his laughter filling the otherwise quiet home. As the film drew to a close, it was time to get ready for bed. Emily led Jake upstairs to his brightly decorated bedroom filled with posters of dinosaurs and action figures. "Let's brush your teeth first," she suggested gently. They headed to the bathroom where Jake eagerly scrubbed his teeth with his favorite dinosaur-shaped toothbrush. The water ran cold from the tap, making tiny splashing sounds against the porcelain sink. Back in the bedroom, Emily tucked Jake into his soft blanket-covered bed. He clutched his stuffed T-Rex tightly, yawning as his eyes began to droop. "Do you want me to read you a story?" Emily asked softly, already knowing the answer. Jake nodded sleepily, pointing to a book about a brave knight fighting dragons. As Emily read aloud, her voice calm and soothing, Jake drifted off to sleep within minutes. She paused for a moment, gazing at the peaceful child under the covers. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, creating shadows that danced across the walls. Emily straightened up, tiptoeing out of the room to let Jake rest undisturbed. But something felt off. A strange sensation prickled at the back of her neck, though she couldn't quite place what it was. Downstairs, she checked her phone. It was now 9 o'clock. The Thompsons should be returning soon. To pass the time, she decided to tidy up the living room a little, picking up stray toys and arranging cushions neatly on the sofa. The house was eerily silent, except for the occasional creak of floorboards settling. Emily tried not to think too hard about it, but found herself glancing over her shoulder more often than usual. Deciding to make sure all was well upstairs, she climbed the stairs slowly, one hand trailing along the wooden banister. Reaching Jake's room, she hesitated briefly before pushing the door open just enough to peek inside. The dim glow from the nightlight illuminated the space, showing Jake still sound asleep. Relief washed over her until her gaze fell upon the bed. Beneath the edge of the mattress, something moved. Her heart skipped a beat. Was it just a trick of the light? No, there it was again, a shadow shifting ever so slightly. Fear gripped her chest like a vice. What could possibly be hiding under a 4-year-old's bed? "Hello?" Emily called out cautiously, her voice trembling slightly. There was no response, only silence thick enough to cut with a knife. Her mind raced with possibilities, yet none made sense. Gathering whatever courage she possessed, she stepped closer to the bed. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to leave the room immediately, but curiosity, or perhaps duty, rooted her feet to the spot. Kneeling beside the bed, she leaned forward carefully, peering underneath. At first, all she saw were dust bunnies and scattered Legos. Then, slowly, a pair of eyes locked onto hers. Cold, dead eyes devoid of any humanity. A guttural growl escaped from beneath the bed, sending chills down her spine. Before she could react, a hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. Emily screamed, yanking her arm free and stumbling backward. The intruder emerged swiftly, revealing itself to be a man dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by a ski mask. His breathing came in harsh pants as he surveyed the room, clearly startled by her presence. For a brief second, their gazes met, hers wide with terror, his calculating and dangerous. Without thinking, Emily bolted toward the door. Her bare feet slapped against the hardwood floors as she raced down the hallway, adrenaline pumping fiercely through her veins. Behind her, she heard the thud of footsteps following closely. Panic surged within her, urging her to move faster. She reached the top of the staircase, nearly tripping in her haste. Reaching the bottom, she fumbled with her phone, trying desperately to dial 911. Her fingers shook uncontrollably, making it difficult to press the right buttons. Meanwhile, the footsteps grew louder, echoing ominously throughout the house. Just when she thought she might reach safety, a strong hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. The masked figure loomed over her, towering menacingly. Emily's breath hitched in her throat as she struggled against his grip. With every ounce of strength left in her body, she kneed him in the stomach, causing him to double over momentarily. Seizing the opportunity, she dashed toward the front door, unlocking it frantically. Bursting outside, she stumbled onto the porch, slamming the door shut behind her. Locking it securely, she finally managed to call emergency services, her voice breaking as she explained the situation. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing nearer with each passing second. Clutching herself tightly, Emily collapsed onto the steps, tears streaming down her face. Minutes later, police cars screeched to a halt in front of the house. Officers swarmed the property, weapons drawn as they entered cautiously. Neighbors peeked out of their windows, whispering amongst themselves about the commotion. Eventually, the suspect was apprehended hiding in the attic, though his motives remained unclear. In the days that followed, investigators pieced together fragments of the truth. The man turned out to be a convicted criminal who had recently escaped from prison. How he ended up in the Thompsons' home remained a mystery, but authorities believed he may have been targeting random houses in the area. Thankfully, Jake remained unharmed throughout the ordeal. Night shift nurse saw something not human. Every night, the corridors of St. Mary's Hospital in Chicago were eerily silent after midnight. The hospital had been built over a century ago, and its old brick walls seemed to whisper secrets from decades past. For Emily Carter, a dedicated nurse working the night shift, this place was both her sanctuary and her battleground. She had worked there for 5 years, but nothing could have prepared her for what happened one fateful evening. It all began on a cold November night when the wind howled outside like an angry ghost. Emily started her shift at 11:00 p.m. sharp, as she always did. Her station was located on the 3rd floor, where most patients were recovering from surgeries or dealing with chronic illnesses. The atmosphere was calm, almost too calm. There were no emergency calls that night, no sudden beeping monitors, just the rhythmic hum of fluorescent lights above her desk. Emily glanced at the clock hanging near the nurse's station. It read 2:43 a.m. It was her usual routine during these quiet hours, checking patient charts, ensuring medication schedules were up to date, and occasionally walking through the hallways to make sure everything was in order. But something felt different tonight. There was a heaviness in the air, a feeling she couldn't quite put into words. At around 3:15 a.m., Emily decided to check on Mr. Thompson, an elderly man who had undergone hip replacement surgery earlier that week. His room was at the far end of the corridor, room 317. As she walked down the dimly lit hallway, her footsteps echoed softly against the tiled floor. The silence was oppressive, almost suffocating. She paused momentarily outside his door, noticing that it was slightly ajar. That wasn't unusual. Sometimes staff would leave doors open for ventilation. Still, she hesitated before pushing it gently. Inside, Mr. Thompson lay peacefully asleep under his white sheets. Everything seemed normal until Emily noticed something peculiar by the window. A shadow moved quickly across the glass, faster than any human could run. Her heart skipped a beat. She turned toward the window, squinting into the darkness beyond. Nothing. Just the empty parking lot bathed in pale moonlight. Shaking off the unease, Emily returned to her station, trying to convince herself that it was probably just a trick of the light, or maybe even a bird flying past. Yet, the thought lingered in the back of her mind. What if it wasn't? Hours passed, and dawn was still hours away. At 4:30 a.m., another strange occurrence took place. Emily heard soft whispers coming from the supply closet down the hall. Curious, admittedly a little nervous, approached the small wooden door labeled Supplies. She knocked lightly first, calling out, "Is anyone in there?" No response. Carefully, she opened the door. The room was exactly as she remembered, its stacks of gauze, bandages, gloves, neatly arranged on metal shelves. But then she saw Ita's single footprint on the concrete floor leading out of the closet. The print looked normal enough, except for one detail: it had 6 toes. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. She stared at the mark, unable to believe what she was seeing. How could such a thing exist? And more importantly, why hadn't anyone else noticed it before? Panic began to rise within her, but she forced herself to stay calm. Maybe it was some kind of prank played by a mischievous intern, or so she hoped. By 5:00 a.m., exhaustion set in, but sleep was impossible now. Every sound seemed amplified: the creak of the floorboards, the faint rustling of curtains swaying in the breeze. Emily resolved to finish her shift without letting fear control her actions. However, fate had other plans. As she documented the final entries in her logbook, a chilling voice whispered directly behind her ear, "You shouldn't be here." She spun around, her pen falling to the ground with a clatter. Nobody was there. Only the empty chairs surrounding the nurse's station greeted her gaze. Cold sweat dripped down her spine as she realized the voice hadn't come from anyone visible. It sounded wrong, not human. The tone carried an unnatural cadence, almost mechanical, yet undeniably alive. Trembling, Emily grabbed her phone and dialed security immediately. They promised to send someone up right away, though they sounded skeptical about her claims. While waiting, she tried to focus on deep breathing exercises, anything to distract herself from the growing dread filling the room. When the security guard finally arrived at 5:45 a.m., he found Emily sitting rigidly in her chair, eyes wide with terror. He inspected the area thoroughly but found nothing out of the ordinary. Still, he assured her that whatever she experienced, it would be investigated further. Privately, however, Emily knew they wouldn't find anything tangible to explain what occurred that night. From that point onward, Emily requested transfers to different shifts whenever possible. Though officially unexplained, rumors spread among the staff about supernatural occurrences happening late at night in St. Mary's Hospital. Some dismissed them as mere superstition, while others chose to believe. Years later, Emily recounted the story to friends over coffee, laughing nervously as though dismissing the memory herself. But deep down, she never forgot those moments spent alone in the darkened halls of St. Mary's. Those fleeting glimpses of shadows and whispers, not meant for human ears, stayed etched in her memory forever. Chilling 911 call from missing hiker emerges. The chilling 911 call that emerged from the disappearance of a lone hiker in the dense forests of Oregon has left authorities and listeners alike with more questions than answers. This is the story of Emily Carter, a passionate adventurer who ventured into the heart of Mount Hood National Forest on an early autumn morning. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth as sunlight filtered through the canopy above. It was supposed to be just another day for Emily, but it turned out to be her last known moment of clarity. Emily had planned her hike meticulously, informing friends about her route and expected return time. She started at Timberline Lodge around 6:30 a.m., eager to explore trails less traveled by others. Her goal was to reach Lost Lake before sunset, a serene destination shrouded in mystery due to its remote location. As she ascended higher into the wilderness, the forest grew quieter, almost eerie in its stillness. Birds chirped faintly in the distance, their songs barely breaking the heavy silence enveloping the woods. By midday, Emily realized something was wrong. Her GPS device malfunctioned, leaving her disoriented amidst towering trees that seemed endless. Panic began creeping in as shadows lengthened across the forest floor. With no signal on her phone, she decided to conserve battery while searching for higher ground where reception might improve. Hours passed without success until desperation forced her hand. Using what little power remained, she dialed 911 at 4:17 p.m. "Hello?" came Emily's shaky voice over static-filled lines. "Can anyone hear me?" There was pause. A deep breath could be heard, followed by trembling words. "I'm lost. I don't know where I am." Dispatchers tried calming her down, asking specific questions about landmarks or recognizable features nearby. But all Emily could describe were ancient firs surrounding her like silent sentinels under fading daylight. "It feels so cold now," she muttered softly, fear evident in every syllable. "And there's this strange noise, like whispers." As night fell quickly over the mountainous terrain, temperatures plummeted drastically. In background noises captured during the call, rustling leaves mixed with unidentifiable sounds, something moving closer, perhaps? Emily hesitated before speaking again, her tone laced with growing dread. "There's movement out there. Something's watching me." Dispatchers reassured her help was coming, urging her to stay put despite increasing unease. However, communication became sporadic as battery levels drained further. At one point, Emily screamed suddenly, cutting off mid-sentence. "Oh my God, what was that?" After several minutes of silence punctuated only by heavy breathing, the line went dead completely at 5:42 p.m. Search and rescue teams were deployed immediately based on triangulated coordinates provided earlier in the call. Yet, despite extensive efforts spanning days, no trace of Emily Carter has ever been found. Only remnants of her belongings, a torn backpack, water bottle, flashlight lying discarded near a cluster of boulders were discovered miles away from initial search areas. Locals familiar with these parts whispered tales of old spirits haunting certain sections of the forest, warning outsiders not to venture too far alone, especially after dark. Others dismissed such superstitions outright, attributing Emily's fate purely to natural dangers inherent within untamed wildernesses. Whatever truly happened remains shrouded in mystery, forever etched into collective memory through that haunting final transmission. Voices in the woods called my name. The sun had just begun its descent, casting a golden hue across the dense forest of Blackwater National Wildlife Refuge near Cambridge, Maryland. It was an ordinary Saturday evening when Emily Carter decided to take her usual stroll through these woods. She often visited this place after work, finding solace in the quiet embrace of nature. The air carried a crisp chill that hinted at the approaching autumn season. Emily, a 28-year-old graphic designer, lived alone in a small apartment on King Street. Her job kept her busy during the week, but weekends were reserved for exploring the outdoors. This particular day started like any other. She woke up at 5:00 a.m., prepared her backpack with essentials: water bottle, flashlight, notebook, and a pocket knife. By 6:30 p.m., as daylight began fading, she found herself deep within the refuge's trails. As she walked along the well-worn path, the forest seemed unusually alive. Leaves rustled softly underfoot, creating a gentle melody against the backdrop of distant bird calls. The trees stood tall and ancient, their branches intertwined above like nature's cathedral ceiling. Everything appeared normal until Emily reached the old wooden bridge spanning a narrow creek. At precisely 7:15 p.m., something peculiar happened. As she crossed the creaking planks, Emily heard it. A faint whisper carried by the wind. "Emily," the voice called softly, almost playful. She stopped abruptly, heart pounding slightly faster. Looking around, she saw nothing but the familiar surroundings of the forest. Surely, it must have been her imagination playing tricks. Continuing her walk, the whispers grew more insistent. "Emily, come closer." Each word sent shivers down her spine. The once peaceful atmosphere now felt charged with an unseen presence. By 7:45 p.m., darkness enveloped the woods completely, yet the moonlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy above. Reaching the clearing where she usually sat to sketch, Emily noticed something odd about the large oak tree she loved so much. Its bark seemed darker, almost blackened compared to previous visits. Approaching cautiously, she realized the tree wasn't merely dark, it pulsed faintly with an unnatural glow. Her breath caught in her throat as strange symbols began forming on the trunk before her eyes. Time seemed to stand still as the symbols illuminated brighter, casting eerie shadows around the clearing. At exactly 8:30 p.m., the voices intensified into a cacophony of murmurs. They spoke in languages Emily didn't recognize, yet somehow understood the meaning behind their words. Fear gripped her chest as realization dawned. These weren't random sounds. They formed coherent sentences about events long past. The clearing temperature dropped dramatically. Frost formed instantly on leaves surrounding the glowing tree. Emily's hands trembled as she reached out, drawn inexplicably toward the pulsating light. Just before touching the bark, visions flooded her mind, scenes from centuries ago when this land belonged to indigenous tribes who revered this very spot as sacred ground. By 9:00 p.m., the visions became overwhelming. She saw rituals performed beneath the same moonlight, people dressed in traditional garments chanting prayers that echoed through time. Among them stood a young woman no older than 20, whose face bore striking resemblance to Emily's own features. This figure watched silently as flames danced around the circle, illuminating faces filled with both reverence and fear. Suddenly, reality snapped back. Emily found herself kneeling on the cold ground, breathing heavily. The tree's glow faded gradually, leaving behind only the faint scent of burning wood. Checking her watch, she discovered nearly 2 hours had passed without notice. Rising unsteadily, she glanced one last time at the now ordinary-looking oak before hurrying back towards the main trail. Walking briskly, every sound seemed amplified, twigs snapping far off, rustling bushes nearby. Shadows moved unnaturally fast between trees, though logic insisted it was merely tricks of fading moonlight. Reaching her car parked near the refuge entrance at 10:15 p.m., relief washed over her briefly. But sleep proved elusive that night. Lying awake in bed, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every creak of the building sounded louder than usual. When morning finally arrived, she resolved to research the history of Blackwater Refuge further. Days turned into weeks. During her investigation, Emily uncovered stories told by local Native American elders about cursed areas within the refuge. One tale particularly resonated: a young maiden sacrificed unwillingly during a desperate ritual to appease angry spirits centuries ago. Her spirit supposedly lingered, calling those with similar fates to join her eternal vigil. Haunted by recurring dreams featuring the mysterious young woman from her vision, Emily eventually returned to the clearing. This time, armed with historical knowledge and determination, she sought answers rather than escape. Standing before the oak tree once more, she whispered words learned from tribal archives. He lived alone, but something else answered. The house on Maple Street had always been a quiet place. It stood alone, surrounded by tall oak trees that whispered secrets to each other in the wind. The neighborhood knew little about its occupant, an elderly man named Henry Carter, who lived there for over 2 decades. He was reclusive, often seen tending to his garden or sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. His life seemed simple and uneventful until something strange began to happen. Henry's days were predictable. Every morning at 7:00 a.m., he would wake up, brew his coffee, and sit by the window to watch the sunrise. On one particular day, however, everything changed. That morning, as usual, Henry prepared his breakfast and sat down at the kitchen table. The clock ticked softly, filling the silence of the room. He glanced at the calendar hanging on the wall. It read October 15th. Autumn had painted the leaves in shades of orange and red, creating a serene atmosphere outside. But inside, Henry felt uneasy. There was a faint creak from upstairs, though he hadn't heard anyone move around. He paused, placing his fork gently onto the plate. A chill ran down his spine as he listened intently. Silence. Then another creak. This time, it sounded closer. Henry frowned, wondering if perhaps the old house was just settling. After all, it had been standing for nearly 100 years. Still, curiosity got the better of him. Slowly, he stood up and climbed the stairs, each step echoing beneath his feet. The air grew colder as he reached the 2nd floor. At the top of the staircase, he stopped. The hallway stretched before him, dimly lit by the pale sunlight filtering through the curtains. To his left was the guest bedroom, which he rarely used. To his right was the master bedroom where he slept every night. Straight ahead was the bathroom. Everything appeared normal. But then came the sound of soft whisper, barely audible, coming from the guest bedroom. Henry hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. Who could be here? He didn't have visitors, nor did he know anyone who might sneak into his home. With trembling hands, he pushed open the door. The room was empty except for an old dresser and a single bed covered with a faded quilt. Yet, the whisper continued, now louder and clearer. It wasn't human, it sounded distorted, almost mechanical, yet filled with emotion. Fear gripped Henry tightly. He backed away slowly, closing the door behind him. That evening, after sunset, Henry decided to call the local police station. They arrived promptly. 2 officers named Mark Johnson and Linda Myers. Both were kind but skeptical when Henry explained what he'd heard. Officer Johnson chuckled nervously while Officer Myers tilted her head, studying Henry carefully. "Sir," she said gently, "houses sometimes make noises. It's nothing to worry about." Despite their reassurances, the officers agreed to search the house thoroughly. As they moved from room to room, Henry followed closely behind. When they reached the guest bedroom again, the whispers returned, this time even stronger. Both officers froze mid-step, exchanging startled glances. Officer Myers turned to Henry, her voice tinged with concern. "Did you hear that?" For the first time since the incident began, Henry felt validated. However, no source for the sound could be found. The officers suggested installing cameras to monitor any unusual activity. Reluctantly, Henry agreed. Over the next few days, the cameras captured nothing out of the ordinary during daylight hours. At night, however, things took a darker turn. On the 3rd night, the camera feed showed movement in the guest bedroom. Shadows danced across the walls, forming shapes that resembled figures. Then, a low growl emanated from the room, followed by rapid knocking against the walls. Henry watched the footage in horror, unable to explain what he was seeing. Desperate for answers, he reached out to a paranormal investigator recommended by a neighbor. The investigator, a woman named Emily White, arrived the following week. She brought specialized equipment to detect electromagnetic fields and record audio anomalies. Her demeanor was calm and professional, though her eyes betrayed a hint of skepticism. Together, they set up more devices throughout the house, focusing particularly on the guest bedroom. Emily warned Henry not to enter the room unless absolutely necessary. As the days passed, the disturbances escalated. Objects moved without explanation. Doors slammed shut on their own. And the whispers grew louder, sometimes forming words that chilled Henry to the bone. One night, as Emily reviewed the recordings, she caught something startling: a voice saying, "You shouldn't be here." The tone was cold, menacing. Both Henry and Emily exchanged worried looks. By this point, the stress was taking its toll on Henry. Sleep became elusive, and dark circles formed under his eyes. Emily encouraged him to stay elsewhere temporarily while she conducted further research. Reluctantly, Henry agreed, leaving the house in her care. During his absence, Emily documented numerous incidents, including a sudden drop in temperature and shadowy figures appearing briefly in photos taken inside the house. When Henry returned, he found Emily waiting for him in the living room. Her expression was grave. "Henry," she began cautiously, "I think we're dealing with something more complex than I initially anticipated. Whatever is in your house, it doesn't want us here." Determined to reclaim his home, Henry asked Emily to perform a cleansing ritual. Though hesitant, she complied, performing a series of prayers and chants designed to ward off negative energies. For a brief period afterward, peace returned to the house. The whispers ceased, and the shadows vanished. Henry hoped the ordeal was finally over. But fate had other plans. Exactly 1 month later, on November 15th, the disturbances resumed. This time, they were fiercer than ever. The whispers evolved into screams, shattering the fragile calm Henry had regained. Desperate and exhausted, he made the difficult decision to leave Maple Street forever. Selling the house proved challenging due to its reputation, but eventually, a buyer emerged, an unsuspecting young couple eager to start a new chapter in their lives. Victim's ghost led police to her killer. It was a cold October evening in the small town of Willow Creek, USA. The leaves had begun to fall from the trees, painting the streets with hues of orange and red. A chill ran through the air as Detective Mark Thompson stood outside the old Victorian house at 13 Maple Street. His breath formed tiny clouds in front of him as he exhaled deeply. The case had baffled the entire police department for weeks. Emily Carter, a beloved 28-year-old schoolteacher, had disappeared without a trace. Her car was found abandoned near the edge of Blackwood Forest, its engine still warm. The forest loomed ominously behind the detective, its dark shadows stretching like skeletal fingers into the fading light. Detective Thompson had spent countless sleepless nights poring over the evidence. Interviews with neighbors revealed little. Emily was known for her kindness and gentle demeanor. She lived alone, having recently moved to Willow Creek to start a new chapter in her life. Her apartment on the second floor of the Victorian house remained untouched, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. As the investigation dragged on, strange occurrences began to unfold around the town. Officer Linda Martinez reported hearing faint whispers coming from the empty rooms of the police station late at night. The sound resembled a woman's voice, though no one could understand the words clearly. Other officers dismissed it as stress-induced hallucinations, but Linda felt an inexplicable connection to the phenomenon. One particularly stormy night, as thunder rolled across the sky, Detective Thompson decided to revisit the crime scene. Standing beneath the flickering street lamp, he noticed something peculiar about the shadows cast by the trees. They seemed to form patterns resembling human figures. As he stepped closer to investigate, a sudden gust of wind carried with it a distinct scent of lavender. It was the same fragrance Emily always wore. Shaking off the eerie feeling, Detective Thompson returned to his office. That night, as he reviewed the case files once more, he experienced something truly extraordinary. The room temperature dropped dramatically, causing his breath to fog up even though he was indoors. A soft tapping sound came from the window, though upon inspection, there was nothing outside. Then, the most unsettling event occurred. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught movement near the filing cabinets. Turning slowly, he saw a faint figure standing just beyond arm's reach. The apparition took the shape of a young woman wearing a white dress. Her features were hazy, but her presence radiated both sorrow and urgency. "Help me," came a whisper so quiet yet so clear that it sent shivers down his spine. The ghostly figure pointed towards a specific file on his desk before vanishing into thin air. Confused but intrigued, Detective Thompson opened the indicated file. Inside, he found photographs of an abandoned cabin deep within Blackwood Forest. Acting on this supernatural clue, a search party was immediately organized. Armed with flashlights, they ventured into the heart of the forest under the pale glow of a crescent moon. The journey was fraught with tension. Every snapping twig and rustling leaf seemed amplified in the oppressive silence. When they finally reached the cabin, it appeared far older and more decrepit than any photograph could capture. Inside, they discovered horrifying evidence linking the cabin to several missing persons cases spanning the past decade. But their most crucial find lay hidden beneath the floorboards, Emily's personal belongings, along with a journal detailing her final days. Through painstaking analysis of the journal entries, detectives pieced together a chilling narrative. Emily had stumbled upon the truth about a reclusive man living in the woods. He preyed on unsuspecting victims, luring them to the cabin under false pretenses. Her writings revealed her growing fear and determination to expose his crimes. However, she hadn't realized how dangerous her discovery truly was until it was too late. Armed with this newfound information, authorities tracked down the suspect, a man named Walter Kane, who had lived isolated from society for years. During questioning, Kane exhibited signs of severe mental instability. Confronted with overwhelming evidence, including DNA traces found at the cabin, he eventually confessed to Emily's murder. Though justice was served, the experience left an indelible mark on those involved. Detective Thompson often reflected on that fateful night when the supernatural intervened to solve the case. Even now, walking through the precinct late at night, he sometimes hears faint whispers echoing through the halls, reminders of the mysterious bond between the living and the dead. Willow Creek gradually returned to normalcy, yet locals occasionally speak in hushed tones about the spectral figure seen wandering near Blackwood Forest. Some claim it's Emily, forever searching for peace. Others believe she remains to protect others from meeting the same fate. Whatever the truth may be, one thing is certain. Some mysteries transcend our understanding, lingering just beyond the veil of reality. She walked into fog, never came out. It was a crisp autumn evening in the small town of Blackwater Hollow, nestled deep within the forested hills of New England. The air carried a chill that sent shivers down anyone who dared to linger outside after sunset. The locals often spoke in hushed tones about the dense fog that would roll in unpredictably, blanketing the area with an eerie silence. No one ventured far from home when the fog appeared. It was as if nature itself warned them to stay indoors. Her name was Emily Carter, a 26-year-old graphic designer living alone in her modest apartment on Maple Street. She had moved to Blackwater Hollow just 6 months prior, lured by its quiet charm and affordable rent. Emily loved walking through the woods near her home, finding inspiration for her artwork among the towering trees and winding trails. But this particular evening, something felt different. A strange unease settled over the town as twilight approached, but Emily didn't notice it at first. Her mind was preoccupied with thoughts of deadlines and sketches waiting to be finished. At exactly 7:15 p.m., she grabbed her coat and decided to take a short walk before dinner. Just around the block, she told herself, stepping out into the cool night. The streetlights flickered faintly above her head, casting long shadows across the pavement. As she turned onto Pine Avenue, a thick mist began to creep up from the ground, swirling gently between the houses like smoke rising from unseen fires. Emily paused for a moment, feeling a twinge of discomfort. This wasn't the usual morning fog. It seemed heavier, more oppressive, almost alive. She hesitated, but then shrugged it off. Probably nothing, she muttered under her breath, continuing her stroll. By now, the fog had grown denser, obscuring the outlines of buildings and streetlights. It was eerily silent, no sound of crickets or rustling leaves, only the soft crunch of her boots against the gravel path. At 7:23 p.m., Emily realized she couldn't see much beyond a few feet in front of her. Panic started to rise in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. Okay, I just need to retrace my steps, she said aloud, trying to reassure herself. But as she walked back toward what she thought was Pine Avenue, the familiar landmarks were gone. The street signs, the lampposts, even the distinctive shape of Mrs. Thompson's house all vanished beneath the suffocating gray haze. Fear crept into her voice as she called out softly, "Hello? Is anyone there?" There was no answer, only the unsettling sensation of being watched. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Emily wandered deeper into the fog. Her watch showed 7:45 p.m., but the numbers felt meaningless. Every direction looked the Samian endless expanse of white emptiness. Then she heard Ida's faint whisper carried on the wind. At first, it sounded distant, barely audible, but soon it grew louder, surrounding her from all sides. "Help!" the voice rasped, chilling her to the bone. Emily froze, her heart pounding wildly in her chest. "Who's there?" she demanded, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to sound brave. Another pause followed, broken only by the sound of her own ragged breathing. And then, footsteps. They weren't hers. They came from somewhere behind her, slow and deliberate, crunching against the ground. She spun around, peering desperately into the fog, but saw nothing. The whispers returned, closer this time, overlapping one another until they formed a cacophony of voices. Some sounded human, others unearthly, their words unintelligible yet somehow filled with malice. Emily stumbled forward, desperate to escape, but every step led her further into the labyrinth of mist. Her phone battery died at 8:03 p.m., leaving her completely cut off from help. Tears streamed down her face as she shouted into the void, "Please, someone help me." And then, everything went still. The whispers stopped abruptly, the footsteps ceased, and the oppressive weight of the fog lifted slightly. In front of her, barely visible through the haze, stood a figure. Its form was indistinct, cloaked entirely in shadow, but its presence radiated an overwhelming sense of dread. Emily wanted to scream, to run, but her legs refused to obey. All she could do was stare in frozen terror as the figure stepped closer, its features remaining hidden behind layers of darkness. Minutes or perhaps hours passed as Emily remained trapped in this surreal encounter. Finally, at 9:17 p.m., the fog began to thin, retreating as quickly as it had arrived. When it dissipated entirely, Emily was nowhere to be found. Search parties scoured the area throughout the night, calling her name and shining flashlights into the woods, but there was no sign of her. By dawn, the streets of Blackwater Hollow were eerily quiet once more, as though the previous events had never occurred. In the days that followed, rumors spread like wildfire through the town. Some claimed Emily had simply gotten lost and left the area without telling anyone. Others whispered about supernatural forces at work, citing old legends of spirits that lured unwary travelers into the fog, never to return. Her belongings remained untouched in her apartment, including the unfinished sketches she had planned to complete that evening. To this day, no trace of Emily Carter has ever been discovered. On certain nights, especially during the late autumn season, residents of Blackwater Hollow claim to hear faint whispers carried on the wind, accompanied by the sound of footsteps moving silently through the fog. Those who dare to investigate always come back shaken, insisting they saw something or someone in the distance before the mist swallowed them whole again. Perhaps Emily is still out there, lost forever in the endless fog, unable to find her way back to the world she once knew. Or maybe, just maybe, she became part of the legend herself, forever doomed to wander the edges of reality, calling out for help that will never come. FBI found a cabin that shouldn't exist. It was a chilly October evening when Agent Mark Thompson of the FBI received an unusual call from his colleague, Officer Daniel Carter. The call came just as twilight began to settle over the quiet town of Blackwood, nestled deep within the dense forests of the Appalachian Mountains. "Mark?" Daniel's voice crackled through the phone. "You won't believe what we've found here, a cabin that shouldn't exist." The words hung in the air like a cold mist, leaving Mark with more questions than answers. He glanced at the clock on his desk. It was 6:45 p.m. The sun would be fully down by 7:15 p.m., and he knew the forest could become treacherous after dark. Still, curiosity and duty propelled him forward. He grabbed his jacket, flashlight, and notepad before heading out into the crisp autumn night. Driving toward Blackwood took about 40 minutes, but every mile seemed longer as Mark mulled over Daniel's cryptic message. When he finally arrived, the scene greeted him with an eerie stillness. Officers were scattered around the perimeter of the woods, their breath visible in the cool air. Daniel approached him immediately, his face pale under the dim glow of a lantern. "Over there," Daniel whispered, pointing toward the thick cluster of trees. His tone carried an unsettling tremor. "We followed some strange tracks. They led us straight to it." Curiosity mingled with unease as Mark stepped closer. The path wasn't marked on any maps, yet somehow, someone or something had built a cabin deep within these woods. As they ventured further, the temperature dropped noticeably, and the sounds of wildlife faded away. It felt unnatural, almost oppressive, as though the forest itself wanted them to turn back. Finally, after 10 minutes of walking, they reached the structure. It was small, dilapidated, and appeared to have been abandoned for decades. Moss clung to its wooden walls, and the windows were cracked, allowing faint streaks of moonlight to illuminate the interior. But one thing stood out immediately. The door had no lock, no hinges, just smooth wood that seemed impossibly intact compared to the rest of the building. "This can't be right," Mark murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. He hesitated before pushing the door open. The creaking sound echoed unnaturally loud in the silence, making both men pause briefly. Then, slowly, they stepped inside. Inside, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. The air smelled stale, tinged with mildew and something metallic, a hint of rust or blood. A single oil lamp sat on a rickety table near the center of the room, its wick unlit but somehow glowing faintly as if powered by an unseen force. Around the lamp lay several objects, a journal, a compass, and a series of photographs scattered haphazardly across the surface. Daniel picked up the compass first. Its needle spun wildly, refusing to settle northward. "What is this place?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. Mark ignored him, drawn instead to the journal. Flipping through its yellowed pages, he discovered handwritten entries dated sporadically over the past century. Each entry spoke of people who had disappeared without a trace, all linked to this very cabin. One passage described a family seeking refuge during a snowstorm, only to vanish entirely. Another told of a group of hunters who stumbled upon the cabin and never returned home. As Mark read aloud, Daniel wandered to the corner of the room where the photographs lay. They depicted various individuals standing outside the same cabinmen, women, children, all smiling happily as if posing for a keepsake. Yet none of them bore any resemblance to anyone living today. Stranger still, each photo bore a peculiar watermark, a date written in red ink beneath the image. Every single date corresponded to the day the person photographed went missing. A shiver ran down Mark's spine. "This isn't possible," he muttered, trailing off as he turned another page. This time, the writing grew frantic, almost illegible. The final entry read, "They're waiting. Don't go in. Too late." Before either man could react, the lamp flickered violently, casting long shadows across the walls. Both froze, hearts pounding in unison. Then, from somewhere behind them, came a low, guttural noise that sent chills racing up their spines. Slowly, they turned to face the source. Standing in the farthest corner of the room was a figure cloaked in darkness. Its silhouette wavered, as if made of smoke rather than flesh. For a moment, neither agent dared move. Then, with a sudden lurch, the entity lunged forward, forcing Mark and Daniel to flee the cabin in terror. Outside, the forest had changed. Trees loomed taller, branches twisting unnaturally overhead. The once familiar trail now twisted into an endless maze, leading them deeper into the wilderness. Panic set in as hours passed, the stars above offering little guidance. At last, just as dawn began to break, they stumbled upon a clearing where a lone ranger station awaited. Exhausted and shaken, Mark called for backup, recounting everything they had seen. By the time reinforcements arrived, however, the cabin had vanished completely. No traces remained, not even the strange tracks that had originally guided them there. In the days that followed, investigators scoured the area, searching for evidence of the mysterious dwelling. Nothing was found. Some dismissed the story as mere delusion brought on by fatigue, while others whispered theories of supernatural phenomena. But Mark knew better. He couldn't forget the feeling of being watched, the sound of whispers lingering in his ears long after he'd left the woods. Last call came after he was declared dead. The sun had already set over the quiet town of Pine Hollow, casting long shadows across the narrow streets lined with old Victorian houses. The air was crisp and cool, carrying a faint scent of pine needles from the nearby forest. It was just past 9:15 p.m. when the emergency call came through to the local dispatch center. The operator, a middle-aged man named William Thompson, answered the line with his usual professional tone. "Pine Hollow Emergency Services, this is William speaking." There was a brief pause on the other end before a familiar voice replied. The voice belonged to Thomas Carter, a well-known resident who had been declared clinically dead earlier that evening at St. Mary's Regional Hospital. William felt an immediate chill run down his spine as he recognized the name. "Mr. Carter?" William asked cautiously. "Is that really you?" His voice trembled slightly despite his attempt to maintain composure. Thomas spoke in a calm but distant tone. "Yes, it's me. I need help." His words were clear, yet carried an unsettling quality that made William's skin crawl. "I'm still at the hospital. Something isn't right." William quickly glanced at the clock. It read 9:17 p.m. He remembered the official time of death recorded for Thomas was exactly 6:42 p.m. That meant 3 hours had passed since Thomas was pronounced deceased by the medical staff. "Mr. Carter," William began carefully, choosing his words with precision. "Are you sure about where you are? Can you describe your surroundings?" His heart pounded heavily against his chest as he waited for the response. "I'm in room 307, Thomas replied matter-of-factly. "It's dark here now, no nurses or doctors around. Just silence." His description matched perfectly with the isolation ward where they had kept him earlier. But how could he know? Meanwhile, inside St. Mary's Hospital, security guard Robert Hayes was making his rounds. It was 9:20 p.m. and unusually quiet throughout the building. As he approached room 307, he noticed something strange. The door, which should have remained locked according to protocol, stood slightly ajar. Robert hesitated momentarily before pushing it open further. Inside, the room appeared undisturbed. Medical equipment lined the walls while monitors displayed their usual patterns indicating no patient present. Yet, an overwhelming sense of unease filled the space. He couldn't shake off the feeling someone was watching him. Back at the dispatch center, William tried contacting the hospital staff to verify Thomas's claim. However, every attempt resulted in unanswered calls or busy signals. Frustration mounted within him as each second ticked by seemed louder than the last. At precisely 9:25 p.m., another call came into the system, this one originating directly from room 307 itself. William picked up immediately, hoping for clarification. Instead, all he heard was heavy breathing followed by soft whispers repeating over and over again, "Help me." Each syllable echoed eerily through the speaker. Suddenly, without warning, the connection cut off abruptly, leaving behind only deafening silence. Later, investigations revealed no explanation for these events. Phone records confirmed both calls originated from non-existent numbers. Security footage showed no activity near room 307 during those critical moments. And most puzzling of all, Thomas Carter's body remained untouched in the morgue, showing no signs of revival whatsoever. As dawn broke over Pine Hollow the next morning, residents went about their daily routines unaware of the supernatural occurrences unfolding overnight. But for William Thompson and Robert Hayes, life would never be the same again. They often found themselves looking over their shoulders, hearing phantom voices whispering urgently. Last call came after he was declared dead, a chilling reminder lingering endlessly in their minds. Park ranger followed footprints that just stopped. It was a crisp autumn morning in the heart of Yellowstone National Park. The sun had barely risen, casting long shadows through the dense pine forest. A park ranger named Mark Thompson started his shift at 6:00 a.m. sharp. His usual routine involved patrolling the northern trails near the Lamar Valley area. It was one of the most remote sections of the park, known for its breathtaking scenery and occasional wildlife sightings. Mark's day began like any other. He checked his gear, a flashlight, water bottle, compass, and emergency whistle. As he walked along the well-trodden path, he noticed something unusual: a set of footprints in the soft earth. They were human-sized, clearly visible against the morning dew that clung to the ground. Curious, Mark decided to follow them. The footprints led him deeper into the woods. Each step matched perfectly with his own pace. Whoever made these prints seemed to be walking leisurely. At around 7:15 a.m., Mark reached a small clearing where the trail turned sharply left. But when he arrived there, the footprints just stopped. There was no sign of disturbance in the surrounding area. No branches broken, no scuff marks, nothing. Just an empty space where the tracks ended abruptly. Mark paused. His heart rate increased slightly as unease crept over him. He scanned the surroundings carefully. The air felt heavier somehow. Quieter than it should have been. Even the birds seemed to have fallen silent. "Hello?" he called out tentatively. No response came back except for the echo of his own voice bouncing off the trees. Deciding not to take any chances, Mark pulled out his radio to report the situation. Static crackled on the line initially. Then, after several attempts, he managed to reach dispatch. "This is Ranger Thompson," he said slowly. "I've encountered some strange footprints near the Lamar trailhead. They terminate without explanation. Dispatch promised to send backup immediately." While waiting, Mark decided to investigate further. He circled the area methodically, looking for any clue that might explain what happened. That's when he spotted something peculiar hanging from a low-hanging branch about 20 feet away. An old leather belt looped neatly around the trunk. It looked weathered, but still intact. as if someone had left it there intentionally. Time passed slowly as Mark continued searching. The sun climbed higher into the sky, breaking through the canopy above. By mid-morning, another ranger arrived on scene. Together, they documented the findings. Yet neither could offer a reasonable explanation for why the footprints vanished or what purpose the abandoned belt served. Word spread quickly among staff members about this mysterious incident. Some dismissed it as coincidence, while others whispered tales of past disappearances within the park boundaries. Stories told by campers who claimed hearing whispers late at night or feeling watched even when alone. These rumors only fueled Mark's growing uneasiness. Over the following weeks, more reports trickled in. Hikers reported seeing shadowy figures darting between trees during twilight hours. Rangers found additional items scattered throughout different parts of the park. Gloves, hats, pieces of rope, all seemingly placed deliberately rather than accidentally dropped. Each discovery added another layer to the puzzle. One evening, as Mark prepared to end his shift, he glanced down at the map pinned inside his station. His eyes caught sight of a marking he hadn't noticed before. A tiny symbol indicating an unmarked cave system located deep within the wilderness. Intrigued, he decided to explore it the next day. Armed with extra supplies and lighting equipment, Mark ventured toward the marked location early the following morning. Reaching the entrance took nearly 3 hours due to the challenging terrain. Once inside, he discovered walls covered in ancient carvings depicting strange rituals involving humans and animals. Further exploration revealed remnants of clothing buried beneath layers of dirt, styles dating back decades. As days turned into weeks, Mark became obsessed with uncovering the truth behind these mysteries. Every new piece of evidence pointed towards something darker lurking beneath the surface of Yellowstone's beauty. Yet, despite mounting evidence suggesting foul play or supernatural forces at work, official investigations yielded no concrete answers. Eventually, word reached national news outlets about the bizarre happenings within Yellowstone. Experts offered various theories ranging from natural phenomena to elaborate hoaxes. Meanwhile, locals shared their own accounts of encountering similar situations throughout history. Tales passed down through generations spoke of spirits guarding sacred lands against intruders. For Mark, however, the reality remained far too personal. Nights filled with restless dreams featuring endless rows of footprints leading nowhere. Days consumed by relentless pursuit of understanding. Until finally, one fateful afternoon, while examining yet another set of vanished tracks, he heard it. A faint whisper carried on the wind, calling his name softly, drawing him further into the unknown depths of America's first national park. Trail camera captured something behind the trees. It was a quiet evening in the small town of Pine Hollow, located deep within the dense forests of Oregon. The sun had just set, casting long shadows across the landscape as the first stars began to twinkle faintly in the sky. For years, this peaceful community had thrived on its connection to nature, with many residents dedicating their weekends to hiking and exploring the vast wilderness that surrounded them. But for one family, what started as an innocent hobby would soon turn into something far more sinister. The Johnsons were known throughout Pine Hollow for their love of wildlife photography. Mark Johnson, a retired schoolteacher, and his wife Emily, a librarian, often ventured into the woods together, armed with cameras and binoculars. Their son, Jake, now 22 years old and studying environmental science at a nearby university, occasionally joined them during breaks from school. It was Jake who had suggested they invest in a trail camera device designed to capture images of animals passing by when triggered by motion sensors. Little did they know how much this simple piece of technology would change their lives forever. One crisp autumn morning, the Johnsons decided to place the trail camera near a remote area of the forest called Whispering Pines. This part of the woods was notorious among locals for being eerily silent compared to other regions filled with birdsongs and rustling leaves. Some even claimed it felt watched, though most dismissed these feelings as mere superstition. Mark secured the camera to a sturdy oak tree about 5 feet off the ground, aiming it toward a narrow path frequented by deer and other creatures. Satisfied with their setup, the family returned home, eagerly anticipating the footage they might retrieve days later. When they finally collected the memory card a week later, excitement buzzed through the air as they gathered around their computer screen. At first, everything seemed normal images of squirrels darting across branches, rabbits nibbling on grass, and even a majestic buck pausing briefly before continuing its journey. However, midway through reviewing the photos, Emily gasped audibly. There, captured in grainy black and white clarity, stood a figure partially obscured behind several trees. Its posture resembled a human's, but there was something undeniably wrong about it. The way it tilted slightly forward, arms hanging unnaturally long, fingers curling like claws. "Mark," Emily whispered hesitantly, her voice trembling slightly. "What is that?" Mark leaned closer to the screen, squinting at the image. He adjusted the brightness and contrast settings, hoping to make out clearer details. Yet, no matter how hard he tried, the figure remained shrouded in mystery. Whatever it was, it didn't move or interact with the environment. Instead, it simply stared straight ahead, frozen in time, as if waiting patiently for something or someone. Jake suggested revisiting the location immediately, bringing along additional equipment to gather more evidence. Reluctantly, the family agreed, though unease gnawed at the edges of their thoughts. As dusk fell once again, they trekked back to Whispering Pines, flashlights cutting through the growing darkness. Upon reaching the spot where the camera had been placed, they noticed something unsettling. The surrounding vegetation appeared disturbed, as though something large had passed through recently. Twigs snapped underfoot, leaves crunched beneath boots, yet none of these sounds came from any visible source. Suddenly, Mark froze mid-step. His flashlight beam illuminated a pair of glowing eyes reflecting back at him from between 2 birch trees. Before anyone could react, the light shifted, revealing nothing but empty space where the eyes had been moments earlier. Panic rippled through the group, urging them to retreat hastily towards safer ground. That night, sleep eluded all 3 members of the Johnson family as they replayed the day's events over and over in their minds. Over the following weeks, strange occurrences plagued the household. Doors creaked open without explanation, cold spots materialized randomly throughout the house, and faint whispers echoed late at night when everyone should have been asleep. Despite their mounting fear, curiosity drove the Johnsons to analyze every frame captured by the trail camera. They discovered patterns suggesting whatever lurked in those woods followed predictable routines, appearing consistently during twilight hours when natural light waned. Desperate for answers, they reached out to local experts, including historians familiar with Native American legends tied to the region. One elder recounted tales of a spirit known as the Watcher, said to guard sacred grounds against intruders. According to legend, the Watcher manifested only to those who trespassed unknowingly, offering warnings rather than harm unless provoked further. While intriguing, this information provided little comfort to the Johnsons, whose encounters grew increasingly frequent and disturbing. One fateful evening, while setting up another round of surveillance equipment, Jake spotted movement out of the corner of his eye. Turning quickly, he caught sight of a shadow slipping silently between trunks farther down the trail. Without hesitation, he activated the night vision feature on his handheld camera, zooming in desperately to capture anything useful. What appeared on the screen chilled him to the bone-gaunt humanoid shape, moving fluidly despite lacking discernible legs, gliding effortlessly across the forest floor. Its faceless head pivoted slowly in their direction, unblinking eyes locking onto theirs with unnatural intensity. From that point onward, life in Pine Hollow changed irrevocably for the Johnsons. They stopped venturing into the woods altogether, choosing instead to focus on documenting their experiences through written journals and recorded interviews. Word spread quickly among neighbors, sparking debates about whether the Watcher truly existed or represented mere figments of imagination fueled by isolation and stress. Regardless of belief systems, one truth remained undeniable: their trail camera had captured something extraordinary beyond comprehension, leaving behind questions that may never find answers. Bigfoot saved me from a serial killer. It was a chilly autumn evening in the dense forests of Washington state. The air carried an eerie stillness, broken only by the rustling leaves and distant hoots of owls. This is where Emily Carter found herself stranded after her car skidded off the narrow mountain road during a sudden downpour. Her heart pounded as she realized how far she was from civilization. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Emily had always been adventurous, but this trip to the Pacific Northwest seemed different somehow. She had planned a solo camping adventure near Mount Rainier National Park, hoping to escape the chaos of city life. Little did she know that fate would lead her into something far more terrifying than she could ever imagine. As darkness fell over the forest, Emily decided to set up camp under the cover of ancient trees. The moonlight barely penetrated through the thick canopy above, casting long shadows across the forest floor. It was around 9:30 p.m. when she first heard it, a faint whisper carried by the wind. Then came the sound of footsteps, deliberate, slow, methodical. The hairs on her neck stood up as she noticed strange markings carved into nearby tree trunks, symbols she couldn't recognize. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was it some kind of ritualistic sign? Or perhaps just another camper's graffiti? But deep down, she felt uneasy. Something about these marks didn't feel right. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the woods as a branch snapped nearby. Emily froze. Her flashlight beam trembled as she scanned her surroundings. That's when she saw him, a figure standing at the edge of her light's reach, tall, thin, with glowing eyes that pierced through the darkness. He wasn't moving, just watching, waiting. Her instincts told her to run. But before she could gather her courage, another presence emerged from deeper within the forest. This one was different, massive, towering, covered in dark fur. Its form moved silently despite its size. Emily's breath caught in her throat as both figures locked eyes. For what felt like eternity, they simply stared at each other. Then it happened. The thin man lunged toward her. In that split second, everything changed. The large creature reacted faster than she thought possible. With a single powerful motion, it intercepted the attacker. What followed was a chaotic struggle between the two beings. Growls, snarls, and the chilling sound of bones breaking. Emily watched in disbelief as the mysterious beast fought fiercely to protect her. Though terrified, she couldn't help but notice how intelligent its movements were. Not animalistic, almost human-like. After what seemed like hours, but was likely mere minutes, the fight ended abruptly. The attacker lay motionless on the ground while the protector stood guard over Emily. Gathering her wits, she slowly approached the creature. To her astonishment, it allowed her close proximity. Without speaking, there was an understanding between them. A silent agreement that she wouldn't harm him if he kept her safe. They spent the night together under the watchful eyes of countless stars. The atmosphere shifted from fear to cautious gratitude. As dawn broke, the forest transformed dramatically. Golden sunlight filtered through the trees, chasing away the previous night's horrors. Emily knew she needed to leave. But so did her savior. Before parting ways, they shared one final moment of connection, an unspoken promise never to forget this encounter. Back in Seattle, days later, Emily tried returning to normal life. Yet something gnawed at her thoughts constantly. Who or what exactly saved her life that fateful night? And why did those symbols appear specifically around her campsite? Determined to find answers, she began researching local legends. Stories of Bigfoot sightings became increasingly familiar. Could her protector truly be one of these elusive creatures? But there was more, much more. As she dug deeper, disturbing patterns emerged regarding missing persons cases throughout the region. Each victim disappeared near similar symbol-marked areas. Coincidence? Or evidence of something darker lurking in the shadows? Haunted by questions without answers, Emily vowed to uncover the truth, even if doing so meant risking another encounter with either her savior or its deadly adversary. Because now she understood, some things aren't meant to remain hidden forever, and sometimes salvation comes from places we least expect. Bigfoot's footprints led to an unmarked grave. The dense forest of Oregon's Cascade Range was quiet that evening, the kind of silence that felt heavy and unnatural. The sun had dipped below the horizon hours ago, leaving only a faint glow on the western edge of the sky. It was an ordinary night for most people in the small town of Timber Ridge, but not for John Carter, a local hiker who often ventured into the woods alone. He loved the solitude, the peace, and the chance to escape from the chaos of modern life. Little did he know that this particular journey would lead him down a path no one could have predicted. John set out at dusk, his flashlight cutting through the darkness as he followed a narrow trail that snaked its way through towering pines and ancient oaks. The air was cool, carrying with it the earthy scent of damp leaves and moss. His boots crunched softly against the ground, each step deliberate and measured. As he walked deeper into the forest, something unusual caught his eye: a series of large footprints pressed deeply into the soft soil. They were far too big to belong to any known animal or human. Unless, of course, they belonged to Bigfoot. He paused, his heart quickening slightly. This must be some prank, he muttered to himself, though deep down he couldn't shake the feeling that these tracks were real. The prints continued further along the trail, leading him farther away from the safety of the main path. Despite the growing unease in his chest, curiosity got the better of him. He decided to follow them, telling himself he'd turn back if anything seemed truly wrong. As John followed the mysterious footprints, the forest grew darker and more oppressive. The trees seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a canopy overhead that blocked out what little moonlight there was. The temperature dropped noticeably, and a chill ran down his spine. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted eerily, its call echoing through the stillness. He stopped momentarily to check his compass, ensuring he hadn't wandered off course. Everything appeared normal except those enormous footprints ahead of him. After about 30 minutes of walking, the trail abruptly ended at the base of a massive redwood tree. There, surrounded by ferns and fallen logs, lay something that made John freeze: a makeshift cross carved into the bark of the tree. It looked old, weathered by time and exposure to the elements. Beneath it, written in faded letters, were the words, "Rest in peace." "What is this?" John whispered, his voice trembling slightly. A strange sensation crept over him, like being watched. He glanced around nervously, shining his flashlight into the shadows, but saw nothing. Still, the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Something wasn't right here. Then he noticed another detail: the footprints didn't stop at the tree. Instead, they circled around it before disappearing entirely. Confused and increasingly uneasy, John crouched down to examine the area more closely. That's when he found I-10 unmarked grave hidden beneath layers of dirt and pine needles. His stomach churned as he realized the significance of what he'd stumbled upon. Why was there a grave so deep in the woods? And why had no one ever mentioned it? His mind raced with questions, but before he could dwell on them too long, a sound broke the silence: a low growl, distant yet unmistakable. John froze again, his breath catching in his throat. Slowly, he turned his head toward the source of the noise. Through the gloom, he thought he saw movementa, dark shape, moving between the trees. Panic surged within him, and without hesitation, he scrambled to his feet and began running back the way he came. The forest seemed alive now, every rustle of leaves and snap of twigs magnified tenfold. John's flashlight beam darted wildly as he pushed himself faster, adrenaline fueling his escape. Behind him, the growling grew louder, closer. He dared not look back, fearing what he might see. All he could focus on was reaching the safety of the main trail. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he burst through the underbrush and onto the familiar path. Collapsing against a nearby boulder, he tried to catch his breath, his chest heaving. For several minutes, all he could hear was the pounding of his own heartbeat. But then, just as he began to calm down, he heard it, the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps approaching from behind. John bolted upright, fear gripping him anew. He sprinted down the trail, his legs burning with exertion. The footsteps followed relentlessly, closing the gap with alarming speed. Whatever it wasn't slowing down. Desperation clawed at him as he searched frantically for a place to hide. Up ahead, he spotted a hollow log partially buried in the ground. Without thinking twice, he dove inside, pulling dead branches and leaves over the entrance to conceal himself. For what felt like hours, he lay there, barely daring to breathe. The creature, whatever it was, passed close by, its presence almost palpable. The air seemed to vibrate with energy, and John swore he could feel its gaze lingering nearby. Finally, after an agonizing wait, the sounds faded into the distance, and he allowed himself to relax slightly. When dawn finally broke, painting the forest in hues of gold and orange, John emerged from his hiding spot, shaken but alive. He knew he needed to get out of the woods as quickly as possible. Along the way, he passed the same redwood tree where he'd discovered the grave. This time, however, the makeshift cross was gone, replaced by fresh scratches in the bark. Chills ran down his spine as he hurried past, never looking back. Back in Timber Ridge, John recounted his experience to anyone who would listen. Some dismissed it as mere imagination or a bad dream, while others listened intently, their expressions grim. One elderly man named Walter nodded knowingly when John described the location of the grave. "That place has been trouble for years," Walter said solemnly. "People disappear up there, and no one talks about it." John never returned to that part of the forest. In fact, he sold his house in Timber Ridge shortly afterward and moved across the country, unable to shake the memory of that night. To this day, he wonders if the footprints really belonged to Bigfooter, if there was something even darker lurking in those woods. Missing Camper's final video shows a Sasquatch. The forest of Blackwater National Park was eerily silent that night. The stars twinkled faintly above, casting an almost ghostly glow over the dense trees and underbrush. It was 10:45 p.m. when Emily Carter set up her final video recording in the remote area known as Whispering Pines Campsite. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke into the camera. "This is my last attempt to capture anything unusual. I feel like I'm being watched." She paused, looking around nervously. The air felt heavy, oppressive even, with a chilling wind rustling through the branches. Emily had been camping alone for 3 days, determined to find evidence of the legendary Sasquatch that supposedly roamed these woods. Local folklore whispered tales of massive, hairy creatures watching from the shadows, but most dismissed them as mere legend. Yet something about this place unsettled her deeply. Every creak of a branch or distant howl made her heart race faster than before. At 11:17 p.m., her camera captured what would become the most debated piece of footage in modern history. As she panned the camera slowly across the clearing, the initial images showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual forest scenery bathed in moonlight. But then, at the edge of the frame near Old Willow Tree, a shadow moved unnaturally fast. Emily gasped audibly on the recording. What was that? She zoomed in quickly, revealing a figure standing approximately 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur. Its eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, reflecting the dim light of her flashlight. The creature stood perfectly still, observing her with an intensity that sent shivers down Emily's spine. For several long seconds, they locked gazes through the lens of her camera. Then, without warning, it vanished into the trees so swiftly it seemed almost supernatural. Emily stammered, "I don't know what just happened. That thing. It wasn't human." Her hands shook visibly as she lowered the camera, fear evident in every word. Moments later, another sound echoed through the forest, low growls emanating from multiple directions. Emily packed her gear hurriedly, panic rising with each passing second. "I need to get out of here," she muttered, trying to keep her voice steady. As she turned off the camera for the final time that night, strange noises surrounded her. Snapping twigs, crunching leaves, and deep guttural sounds unlike anything she'd ever heard before. When search parties found Emily's abandoned campsite 2 days later, there was no sign of her anywhere. All they discovered was the damaged remains of her tent, scattered belongings, and the chilling video footage she'd recorded. Investigators noted peculiar tracks leading away from the site, much larger than any known animal species, but dismissed them officially as bear prints despite their unusual pattern. Back in town, locals exchanged uneasy glances upon hearing the news. Many remembered similar disappearances throughout the decades, always occurring during full moons near Whispering Pines. Some spoke of seeing towering figures moving silently between the trees late at night, while others claimed to have heard haunting screams coming from deep within the forest. These stories were often met with skepticism, yet now they carried new weight after Emily's disappearance. Months passed, and theories abounded regarding her fate. Cryptozoologists analyzed the video frame by frame, debating whether the creature caught on film could indeed be evidence of Sasquatch existence. Skeptics argued it was merely a well-placed costume or optical illusion caused by lighting conditions. However, none could explain the sheer terror etched onto Emily's face as she confronted whatever lurked in those woods. 1 year later, hikers stumbled upon something disturbing deep within Blackwater National Park. Remnants of clothing believed to belong to Emily, partially buried beneath fallen leaves and moss. Nearby, more mysterious footprints dotted the soft earth, some nearly twice the size of normal human steps. Authorities sealed off the area indefinitely, citing safety concerns for future visitors venturing too far off designated trails. Today, the story of Emily Carter serves as both cautionary tale and enduring mystery among outdoor enthusiasts nationwide. Those brave enough to visit Whispering Pines campsite report eerie sensations, feelings of being watched, unexplained noises, and sometimes glimpses of fleeting movement just beyond reach of sight. Rangers warn against overnight stays in the vicinity due to numerous reports of unsettling encounters since Emily's vanishing act. For many Americans, especially those living near wooded regions where such legends thrive, the possibility of Sasquatch remains tantalizingly real. Whether mythical beast or misunderstood creature, its presence continues to haunt our collective imagination. And perhaps somewhere deep within Blackwater National Park, amidst ancient trees and shadowy clearings, Emily's unanswered questions linger alongside the cryptic entity that took her away that fateful night. Bigfoot stalked our camp for 3 nights. It was a chilly autumn evening in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State. The air smelled of pine and damp earth as we set up camp near Lake Wenatchee. A group of 5 friends, Mark, Jake, Emily, Tom, and Lisa had decided to spend their long weekend exploring this remote wilderness area known for its breathtaking views and serene surroundings. Little did they know that their adventure would turn into something far more terrifying than any of them could have imagined. We arrived at the lake just before sunset on Friday. The golden light cast long shadows across the forest floor, creating an almost magical atmosphere. We chose a spot about half a mile from the water's edge, surrounded by towering fir trees. It felt like stepping into another world, a place untouched by civilization. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and the sounds of the forest came alive around us. Crickets chirped rhythmically, owls hooted in the distance, and occasionally the wind rustled through the branches above. On our first night, everything seemed normal. We gathered around the campfire, sharing stories and laughing under the starlit sky. But sometime after midnight, when most of us were already asleep inside our tents, strange noises began to echo through the woods. At first, it sounded like branches snapping far off in the distance. Then came deeper thuds, as if something heavy was walking nearby. Mark woke up startled and whispered loudly enough to wake everyone else. "Did you hear that?" Everyone sat bolt upright, hearts pounding. We unzipped one side of the tent cautiously and peered outside. The moonlight illuminated patches of the forest, but nothing moved within sight. Still, the unsettling feeling lingered. For the rest of the night, none of us slept soundly. Every creak or groan of the trees made us jump. By dawn, we convinced ourselves it must have been bears or other wildlife roaming the area. Saturday passed without incident during daylight hours. We spent the day hiking along trails near the lake, marveling at the vibrant colors of fall leaves blanketing the ground. Yet as dusk approached, the tension returned. That evening, while preparing dinner over the fire, we noticed unusual tracks in the soft soil near the edge of our campsite. They weren't bear prints nor deer hooves. These were enormous footprints, nearly twice the size of a human's, with distinct toe marks. Our laughter faded instantly, replaced by uneasy silence. As darkness enveloped the forest once again, the eerie sounds resumed. This time, however, they were closer, much closer. Branches cracked right outside our tents. Leaves crunched beneath unseen feet. Heavy breathing echoed faintly through the stillness. Panic bubbled up among us. No one dared step out of their tent. Instead, we stayed huddled together, clutching flashlights and whatever makeshift weapons we could find. Each noise sent shivers down our spines. The second night stretched endlessly. Sleep eluded us entirely as we listened intently to every movement outside. Around 3 a.m., a loud crash shook the entire camp. Something had knocked over one of our chairs near the fire pit. Then came a guttural growl, not angry, but rather curious and low-pitched. It sent chills racing up my spine. My hands trembled, holding the flashlight beam steady toward the source of the sound. Nothing showed up in the narrow circle of light. By Sunday morning, exhaustion weighed heavily on all of us. We debated whether to leave immediately or stay put until dark. Reluctantly, we agreed to pack up quickly and head back to civilization. However, fate had other plans. During breakfast preparation, another round of mysterious noises started. Only now, these weren't random. They followed a pattern. Whoever or whatever was out there circled our camp methodically, pausing periodically as though observing us. At this point, fear gripped us tightly. Communication between us became strained, short sentences filled with urgency. "What do we do?" "Stay calm," someone replied, though their voice quivered noticeably. Time slowed down as each second brought new anxiety. Finally, mid-afternoon, we managed to dismantle our gear and load everything onto backpacks. Before departing, we scanned the dense foliage surrounding us one last time. There, hidden partially behind a tree trunk, stood a shadowy figure watching silently. Too tall to be human, covered in thick fur, eyes glowing faintly in reflection of sunlight filtering through canopy. Without hesitation, we fled down the trail as fast as possible. Adrenaline fueled our steps despite fatigue setting in. Looking back confirmed the creature maintained a safe distance behind us, matching our pace effortlessly. Hours later, upon reaching safety at Ranger Station miles away, relief washed over us, mixed with disbelief. Rangers listened patiently to our tale, nodding sympathetically. Some believed us, others didn't. Regardless, those 3 nights remain etched forever in our Memorician encounter no amount of rationalization can erase. Mysterious lights over campsite, then she vanished. It was a crisp autumn evening in the heart of Colorado's Rocky Mountains. The sun had dipped below the jagged peaks, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. A young woman named Emily sat by her campfire at Willow Creek Campground, enjoying the serenity that only nature could provide. Her tent was pitched just a few feet away, its nylon walls glowing faintly from the firelight. The air was cool, carrying the earthy scent of pine needles and damp soil. Emily had always loved camping. It was her escape from the bustling city life of Denver, where she worked as a graphic designer. She arrived earlier that day, setting up her gear under the watchful gaze of towering evergreens. As night fell, the stars began to appear, their brilliance undiminished by city lights. It was one of those nights when the universe seemed closer, more tangible. Around 8:45 p.m., as Emily sipped her